Chapter 1855. Lu Xiaoyi reacted quickly and shot out his flying sword. "I'll kill you while you're down." But no matter how fast he was, he couldn't be faster than a person who had lost his will to fight. Carrying his old friend, the blind old man sighed and went straight out of the Milky Way. It was a pity. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to thoroughly understand the mystery of the judgment art. This was also the reason why he didn't fight back when he was repeatedly judged. Although the judgment art was a headache, it didn't mean that he was helpless. Among the three cornerstones of the judgment art, he had already seen through the secrets of the impermanence and knew a little about the karma interception. He could still think of a way. Unfortunately, the other party attacked so suddenly that he wasn't prepared at all. If he hadn't covered up his past, he would have been exposed immediately. Now, it was obvious that the ingrate was targeting him. Within the rules, he had no other choice but to accept it silently. He just didn't know if the experience of 3 lives this time was enough for the ingrate to see anything. Out of the Milky Way, the outside world was already a mess. Those who entered, those who came out, those who pushed and pulled, those who died, those who lived, and those who ran. It was impossible to count and judge the situation. One moment, the exterior had the upper hand, and the next moment, the interior had the upper hand. How delightful! Even the north wind was swept in. Military monk and Qing Xian were nowhere to be seen. No one knew if they were dead or struggling in the Milky Way. This was the 3rd time he had entered the palace, and it was not easy for him to come out alive. He had a faint feeling that he was the vanguard of the interior realm. It was not easy to win the respect of these monsters of the interior realm. He had to take it step by step. A monster who was still in the tug-of-war camp said angrily, "Lu Jun. There are also a few cowards in our interiors. They're a disgrace to everyone." Looking in the direction he pointed, there were indeed a few figures wandering around. They were from the interior. Unlike the exterior monsters who turned around and left after coming out, these old people didn't leave. They wanted to stay, but they were worried about the gossip of their companions. If they left, they were afraid that they would leave the circle of the interior forever. Dugu Chiodao was just a saying. One would never be able to leave the circle of masters, the circle of domains, the circle of orthodoxy, the circle of the interior. Only in such a circle could one prove that they were in the trend. Once they left, everything that happened in the future would have nothing to do with them. This was something that no one wanted to see. Lu Xiaoyi tried his best to push them away as he took the opportunity to greet them. "Fellow Taoists, you seem to be quite free. Just now, I almost admitted defeat and joined you guys in a pile." These people were currently in an awkward situation. They were not afraid of being blamed, but they were afraid of being ignored and treated as outsiders. If this continued for a long time, they would lose face. If they really left, this separation would be difficult to eliminate. Therefore, Lu Xiaoyi's teasing came at the right time. "Lu Jun can also admit defeat? Don't you swordsmen fight to the bitter end?" Lu Xiaoyi laughed. "Bullshit. Am I going to throw my life away in exchange for an insignificant memorial arch? In a few years, they would be burned as firewood. We swordsmen are free and unfettered with our swords. You won't understand." The few of them laughed, feeling as if they had found a bosom friend. "We understand. Otherwise, we wouldn't be standing here. If we can't continue to act tough, we can only run away." Lu Xiaoyi agreed. "Fellow Taoists, it seems like you guys have thoroughly studied the word zone of my sword vein. Don't leave yet. There will be a battle at Heng River later. You guys are slacking off now. When the time comes, you have to show your strength. Only then will it be fair." The few of them were donkeys on the slope. They only needed such a simple sentence. When it was spoken by Lu Jun, it had a very different meaning. With just a few words, he won the favor of these monsters. It couldn't be any easier. The friendship between people was actually very simple. Until now, he had already killed 7 of them. In addition to the contributions of Marching Monk, Qing Xian and the rest, the situation of the tug-of-war finally became balanced. Victory and defeat were about to be decided. However, it was also the most intense moment because the real masters at the back of the exterior realm had begun to join the battle. They had been conserving their strength for a long time and had an advantage over the monsters of the interior realm who were generally overdrawn with their mana and spirit. It was also at this moment that Lu Xiaoyi decisively made his slogan when he saw that the time was right. The interior and exterior determine the universe. There's no shame in retreating. Eventually, the East Mountain will rise again. Old and young, run for the future. The timing was just right. Many of the monsters of the interior realm who had fought a battle and barely survived were actually waiting for this sentence. They had already contributed and done their best. Who would be willing to throw their lives away here? However, they couldn't say this. Whoever said it would be guilty and afraid of death. The only one who dared to say it openly was Lu Xiaoyi. 3 battles in a row and 7 people were expelled. There was nothing wrong with him saying that he had to run if he couldn't beat them. However, seeing that his breath was not chaotic and calm, and that he continued to push the river after coming out, it was obvious that the 3 battles didn't affect him at all. Since he still said this, it was definitely not for himself, but to give everyone a way out. This was a kind gesture. It was accepted. It also created a certain kind of status. In order to recruit people, he had to work slowly and carefully. He also had to find a good opportunity to do this in front of these half-immortal monstrous geniuses with ease. Moreover, he was able to succeed. One had to admit that Lu Xiaoyi was very good at winning people's hearts. Unknowingly, he had established himself as the core of this generation of half-immortals. If he could lead everyone to victory in a few more battles, everything would be settled. This was much more effective than the countless words he usually used to get close to people. Whether it was those who were still in the tug-of-war or those who had already retreated to the side, everyone felt very relaxed. There was no sense of crisis that they would either succeed or die trying. Those who were in the tug-of-war were very relaxed because they could retreat if they couldn't win. Anyway, there were already a few people standing outside, so it wasn't shameful for everyone to gather together. Those who had already retreated were even more relaxed because there were still people coming after them. Everyone was still one and no one had to look down on anyone. This was actually a good mentality for a real battle. Could no one understand it? No, everyone would be able to understand it. They were all monsters that were at least 2,000 years old. What could be hidden from them? But so what if they understood it? My strength was unparalleled. I knew how to take care of everyone's feelings. I didn't use everyone as a stepping stone to advance. I can still lead everyone to victory. So, why can't I? Anyway, there must be an end. There must be a leader. Whether it was in a practical sense or in a spiritual sense, if you can do it, you can also come, okay? At least, Lu Xiaoyi did everything in the open. This made people feel that they weren't deceived or used. This was very important. Don't use too much strength. If you continue to push me, I will be pushed by you again. Are you treating me like a donkey? Lu Xiaoyi complained loudly. Everyone praised him together. Capable people do more work, Lord Lu. Chapter 1856. While pushing the river, Lu Xiaoyi was still reminiscing about his experience in the last battle. He had to admit that the judgment prophecy was indeed magical. It was so magical that even a swordsman like him was excited to see it. The blind old man and his companion did not succeed. It was not that their judgment art was not strong enough, but that there was a problem with the way they used it. They used the judgment prophecy as the main form of attack and defense. This was the wrong direction. It was difficult to directly judge a person's life and death. Everyone was a half-immortal. Who could say that they would die just because they were judged? The real use of the judgment prophecy should be in support. It should be used in a split second. Cultivators should have their own attack and defense system. They should use the judgment prophecy at the crucial moment. This was the best way to use it. Lu Xiaoyi was pushed into the Milky Way. It was not that the monsters were playing tricks on him. It was just that he was one of the few powerful people who still had strong combat power. For the sake of the interior realm, who else could push him? He finally got what he wanted. His opponents were one of the strongest pairs of exterior realm masters, Maradi and Ngu. This was Lu Xiaoyi's fourth time entering the Milky Way. He had already defeated 3 groups of exterior realm masters. This was also the third time Maradi and Ngu had entered the Milky Way. They had defeated 2 interior realm masters. Both of them were full of mana and fighting power. They were full of confidence. Both of them knew that in other battles, others might have a way to retreat. However, they did not. This was a life and death battle. Both of them were the only ones who cared about the gains and losses of the Hung River. Maradi guaranteed. Lu Xiaoyi was going to be destroyed. They had caused such a big commotion. There was no room for negotiation. No one would talk now. Maradi and Ngu were also a battle team. However, they were different from the blind old man and the silent man. The blind old man's judgment prophecy was amazing, but he was limited by his realm. It was difficult for him to directly judge a person's life and death. This was the biggest problem. If he could not cause fatal damage to the swordsman, it was just amazing. Life because of the judgment prophecy, death because of the judgment prophecy. In short, it was too monotonous to be strong. The pairing of Maradi and Ngu was more traditional. People always thought that tradition was old-fashioned, but in fact, in the world of cultivation, tradition was the truth that had survived the test of time. They were the righteous path, and also the most difficult to deal with. Lu Xiaoyi staggered to his feet. He was still using his signature whipping escape technique. After twitching for a long time, even his flying sword began to twitch. It was not that his control was weak, but that his control was so precise that it was impossible to determine where the sword chi would land, its might, and its speed. It was like a light bulb with an unstable voltage, flickering on and off. Between the light and the darkness, there was a fierce killing intent. Maradi and Ngu stood side by side. Obviously, they would not choose to compete with the swordsman in terms of speed. That was the stupidest way. No matter how well they worked together, they were not one person. There would always be differences and misunderstandings. The swordsman, on the other hand, was the best at splitting up and teaming up to defeat them one by one. Maradi instantly entered his body. He knew how terrifying this swordsman was, so he would not be careless enough to test him. The deity of lice descended, and Maradi transformed. 1 face, 3 eyes, and 4 arms. His face was dignified and handsome, his skin was extremely light, and he had the messy blue-black hair of an ascetic. The top of his head was decorated with a river and a crescent moon, and a necklace of skulls hung around his neck. His upper body was naked, and his lower body was wrapped in tiger skin. There were cobras coiled around his body, and he held a trident, a black bow, a water jar, and a drum on his waist. Lice had many signs, such as Linga, terror, gentleness, Superman, 3 faces, dancing king, lord of glass, lord of half-women, and so on. Linga, male root, was the most basic sign of Shiva. It was different from the yang gods of Hung River. Although yang gods could also transform into lice, they lacked a trace of deity like Maradi. There was a fundamental difference between them. A deity who was armed to the teeth. Angor was a different kind of person. He was a very elegant cultivator, so elegant that he was nothing but elegant. He perfectly explained the rhythm of his ancestors. He had good eyesight and knowledge, and he had reached the peak of the Tao of support. When Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword flew over, he was the one who made the move. 1 point of the wind rose, 2 points of the stars shook, and 3 points of the Dingjun mountain weakened the sword light layer by layer, but he did not completely destroy it. He only reduced the sword light to a level that everyone could accept. There were 3 deities beside him, and together with the main body, they each had their own uses. They were Angor's doll, Angor's clown, and Angor's patient. Thus, they formed an unbreakable offensive and defensive system. However, his role and support had not been fully realized yet, and he could only gradually understand it in battle. The river of swords swept across the sky, and the Tao changed. It broke through Angor's defense, and under the convergence of the sword light, it slashed down. His target was Angor, and this was also his fighting habit. He preferred to fight with his assistants because he knew very well that these guys could bring him trouble. As long as they were around, he would almost never be able to use his strength as he wished. The doll was hit by the sword. Pieces of cloth fluttered in the air, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of its mouth. It was hard to imagine that the little doll was not annihilated after being hit by such a sword. Its big eyes were filled with brutality, and its face was pale. It opened its mouth, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth. It bit Angor's neck and sucked, and instantly came back to life. This was a blood object. It lived on the blood of cultivators. However, Lu Xiaoyi did not have the chance to continue his experiment, because Maradi's attack had arrived. Amidst the vibrations of the waist drum, long black arrows chased after him as if they had grown eyes. They were so fast that they were not any slower than the flying sword. The waist drum was used to disturb the mind. It was exactly the same as the one he had encountered during his battle with Ridich Khan. The only difference was that the disturbance to the divine soul was more intense, and the waves were more obvious. It was as if a huge stone had been thrown into a big lake. Circles of ripples spread out and rushed into every space within the range of the mini Milky Way. He was very familiar with such disturbances. Previously, there was the cauldron of Shinbu, and then there was Ridich Khan's flower drum. These were all similar techniques. With his years of research, he should have been able to deal with them easily. However, he still felt a strong disturbance, and even his control of the flying sword was deviating. This should not be, but after paying a little more attention, he understood the problem. The problem was with Angor. Although he did not attack directly, he was like a multiplier, intensifying the disturbance to Maradi's divine soul through a special method. He could even control the disturbance to a certain extent and cause it to affect according to his own thoughts. If the disturbance to the divine soul was not specifically controlled, the effect would be very limited. With his experience, he could basically ignore it. However, if there was a targeted control, and the changes were completely irregular, then it was not something he could completely ignore. The purpose of all this was the black bow in Maradi's hand. Chapter 1857. The black arrow arrived in a flash. Lu Xiaoyi would have been able to accurately shoot down these long swords from a distance if not for the interference of his divine sense. However, with the interference of his divine sense, it was difficult for him to intercept them from a distance. He could only shoot them down when they were close to his inner defense circle. This meant that if there were any changes, he would have limited time to react. This was only part of the problem. Because of the support of the Godhead, the black arrow's power was abnormally heavy. It wasn't something that a single sword beam could rival. He even needed to gather all his sword beams to completely destroy it. Fortunately, this thing was far from reaching the level of his flying swords that could blot out the sky and cover the earth. This was not the only problem. With the help of the divinity, the arrow was very accurate. Even with his sluggish flying art, he could not escape from it. It was like a maggot attached to a bone. An Ji's attack was indeed extraordinary. His vision was accurate and he directly targeted Lu Xiaoyi's weakness. This was probably the reason why he was able to escape in the void and come back now. He was very proactive, as if he wanted to prove that he was not a coward who ran away from a battle. Lu Xiaoyi was excited by the strong opponent. How long had it been since he used all his strength? The last time was when he killed Riddikin. He liked such opponents because they could help him improve. They could help him grow. Especially the people of the exterior realm. Their orthodoxy was strange and they had many tactics. If it was not for the circumstances, he would have gone to the exterior realm. With a leap, he had already left the area of the battlefield. To Maradi and the other two, this was nothing out of the ordinary. This was the essence of a swordsman's so-called flying sword. If you can't beat your opponent, run away, and come back to fight again. However, there was something strange. In theory, no one could completely escape the detection of the swordsman in the Milky Way. Of course, he would not just admit defeat and jump out of the Milky Way. He must have used a spatial skill. It was a very advanced spatial skill. When he escaped into space, there were no pauses or spatial fluctuations. It was like a hooligan sneaking into a widow's house in the middle of the night. Then, little gangsters slipped out from the back door. It wasn't that the opponent couldn't guard against him. In fact, no matter which direction he came out from, he would be caught at any time. The reason why he did this was because soul disturbance had a very short time to arrive when it was transmitted in waves. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to notice such a small difference in time, but a sharp swordsman would be able to unleash a wave of flying daggers in this short period of time. The target of the attack was still the graceful Angor. Although they were no longer as strong as before, with the help of powerful allies, they were still as proud as roosters. But even a rooster would be scared. Because from the beginning of the battle, the flying sword had only been aiming at him. This swordsman was completely unreasonable. Between the two of them, Marathi was the master. Maladi reminded him only one person. This was the swordsman's psychological tactic. Especially the one who wasn't deeply involved in the incident. His goal was to make you feel unjust and unbalanced, so that you would feel fear, retreat, and protect yourself. Planting a thorn between the two of us, and when the battle suddenly changes, you won't be able to make the right choice like when you're completely focused. This is a terrifying opponent, and his killing methods are not only limited to his sword. There are many other aspects as well. Angor nodded. How could he not know this? But knowing and being calm and composed were two different concepts. The flying daggers slashed down, and Angor's head was still on top of it. But the first time, it was slaughter, and the second time, it was the 5 elements. From the performance of Angor's doll, there didn't seem to be much of a difference between the two. Just as the sword reached the arrow, it disappeared. It was obvious that the sword had entered the space to prepare for the next attack. If we can't solve the problem of space, we'll never be able to catch him. I've seen him teleport a few times, but he's always been a certain distance away. It's obvious that our soul disturbance didn't affect him, but it was weakened by the distance. So, we can either get closer to him and attack. If he's in the center of the soul disturbance, he won't be able to teleport into the extra-dimensional space. Or we can only use the method of destroying the space. What do you think? Marathi shook his head. Let's use our methods and see if he can handle it. He's cunning and has a lot of battle experience. How can he get close to us so easily? If he really gets close, we'll see. I don't care, but you'll be in danger. It's better not to try. The two of them had decided on their plan and began to prepare. When Lu Xiaoyi appeared in the Milky Way again, Marathi threw out a matrix technique. It was a space restriction technique called color sky. It didn't completely block the extra-dimensional space in the Milky Way, but it added the attribute of the color realm to the extra-dimensional space nearby, thus gaining the right to freely enter and exit. A half-immortal throwing a matrix technique was a bit ridiculous, but it was a common thing in the cultivation world. Not every half-immortal could make a matrix technique, and not every half-immortal was willing to spend time and effort to make one. The process of making a matrix technique was very complicated, and it would affect one's cultivation. Generally, only the late-stage half-immortals who had no hope of ascending to immortality would make a few matrix techniques for their juniors. Therefore, it was very precious even for half-immortals, not to mention those who had not fully reached the standard of half-immortals. It was like coating the extra-dimensional space with a layer of color realm film. It was very specific, but it depended on who it was used on. Color was emptiness. Lu Xiaoyi was well versed in Buddhism, especially when he was one of the 36 innate Daos. Among them, there were some innate Daos that were part of the innate Daos. The Tao state flowed and the karmic virtues were unpredictable. Thus, this layer of color world was completely useless to him. Next, it was Amji's turn. Amgu used his sex shadow projection technique, which was to cast a spell on a person and make them carry a star on their back. The effect of the star would not be felt during normal times, but once the space warp was performed, the space warp would be too narrow, and the star would be too big to pass through. This technique had been used during Lu Xiaoyi's time and Jin Dan's time. However, it was called mountain carrying technique, which relied on a mountain that did not exist in the real world to restrict the opponent's movement. At that time, it was mountain carrying technique, but now, it had improved and changed to star carrying technique. This technique tested the mental strength of the cultivator. If one's mental strength was not enough, they would not be able to get rid of the burden of the star. They could only carry this kind of thing that did not exist, and would appear to cause trouble when passing through the space warp. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. With a wave of the Sparrow Palace, he had thrown away the shackles of the star. The so-called magical techniques, forbidden techniques, secret techniques, matrix techniques, Tao illumination, and so on, were actually tests of a cultivator's foundation. If you were immersed in this aspect, your opponent would not be able to catch you. On the other hand, you would not be able to get rid of it. His vast knowledge of the Tao realm provided him with many ways to solve problems. His mental strength was impeccable, and he had no shortcomings in any aspect. Naturally, these so-called magical techniques were useless to him. This was the foundation of a cultivator. Chapter 1858. Lu Xiaoyi continued to slash at Angor. The reason was very practical. Once something was related to God, it would become immortal. It was very troublesome. Of course, part of the reason was because of psychological warfare. Angor had already seen through it, but there was nothing he could do about it. As long as he kept slashing, he would be able to break through Angor's mental defenses. This was also the standard tactic of street brawls. Up until now, both sides had yet to use their full strength. Melody and Angor did not use their full strength because they had not fully seen through the swordsman's abilities. Angor's teleportation was enough to make them unable to use their full strength. If they used their full strength, the swordsman would be able to hide in another dimension. Lu Xiaoyi did not use his full strength either because he knew that his opponents were waiting for him to use his full strength. This was a psychological battle. Before the battle, Qing Xian had already reminded him not to gamble with his life just because he was greedy for speed. It was actually a priceless advice. After cultivating for so long, he was no longer the hothead who was only greedy for speed. Speed was something that could only be manifested when one was slow. It was a change in rhythm. He had already mastered the change in rhythm of speed. What he needed to do now was to change the rhythm of his battle tactics. There were many reasons why Lu Xiaoyi had no choice but to do so. Melody's strength made him an opponent that had to be respected. As a pure disciple of Hengyi River system, Lu Xiaoyi was familiar with his methods because he had come into contact with them too many times. However, Melody was not someone to be trifled with. His familiar moves had been strengthened by his divinity. Not only were they more powerful, but they also had a trace of immortality in them. Therefore, he had to first slay Angor and then focus on the battle with this demigod. Angie had 3 trump cards, or at least that was what it looked like now. He had been using the Angie doll all this time, which was a scapegoat. It had a strong life force, and a single Tao realm cultivator was useless against it. It relied on its bloodline to be indestructible, just like a vampire. Or was it more accurate to call him a vampire count? There was also the Angor clown and the Angor patient. He still had not figured out their uses. What he needed to do now was to force out the true nature of these 2 little things. If he did not break these 3 strange things, he would not be able to slay Angor. The battle was carried out according to the precise calculations of both sides. In a true battle of life and death, impulsiveness and hot-bloodedness would not solve the problem, and cowardice and fear would only lead to death. Calm down. He was extremely calm. Persevering and not being tempted. Insightful insight, a penetrating judgment. Everything was for that one moment of eruption. The three of them understood that the other party was such a person, so they were very careful. When the three of them were abnormally calm, there could only be one result: depressing. It was incomparably dull. The swordsman didn't have a heroic and indomitable aura. His divine form, on the other hand, was completely cowardly. It was as if they weren't fighting 2 against 1, but 2 against 3. The black arrows were still shooting out. Lu Xiaoyi could acutely sense the different sources of power contained in the arrows. The Hangi River orthodoxy did not pay much attention to the innate Tao, but it did not mean that the attacks were monotonous. The black arrows contained many different levels of power, such as earth, water, fire, wind, space, sun, moon, and sacrifice. Marathi was using the changes of different powers to find the best way to deal with his opponent, just like what Lu Xiaoyi was doing. Therefore, the collision between the flying sword and the long arrow was not as simple as it seemed. How could a half-immortal do such a useless thing? They were both looking for each other's weaknesses, probing each other, confusing each other, and setting up traps. In such a collision, they were competing with each other to see who could grasp the essence of the other party better. They were closer to the truth. The competition was everywhere, including the disturbance of the divine sense. Now, the two exterior geniuses were using Marathi to beat the drum, while Eng was adding fuel to the fire. However, Lu Xiaoyi was well aware that the waist drum was a divine object of Marathi, yet it was controlled by Eng. This was unusual. If Lu Xiaoyi got used to it, he would be at a disadvantage in the future. Who was he trying to fool by not controlling his own divine item and giving it to others? Relying on the speed and the space escape, he killed Angor's doll 7 or 8 times. The process was not simple because there were also collisions between the flying sword and the long arrow. The two monsters of the exterior never stopped restricting their ability to move through space. Both sides were disappointed. Lu Xiaoyi did not find a chance to probe further, and Marathi and Angor did not find an effective way to control the space. They could not even delay it, let alone stop it. Lu Xiaoyi's 9th attack was still aimed at Angu as usual. This seemed to have become a fixed pattern, as if this was how it should be. No matter what Angu thought, it was very disrespectful in the world of cultivation to hold down a person and attack him endlessly. But this time, the flying sword suddenly changed direction before it could hit Angor's doll. It suddenly slashed diagonally and collided with the waving trident. Marathi did not let down his guard even when he was idle. This was the quality of an excellent fighter. The force of the sword was so strong that Marathi could not stop himself from drifting. At this moment, Lu Xiaoyi did not escape into the dimensional space as usual. Instead, millions of sword rays rushed down crazily, taking the initiative to seek a change of position. The two monsters of the exterior reacted quickly. Marathi transformed into Superman and Angor's clown jumped out. The rhythm of the waist drum suddenly sped up and Angor's patient opened his eyes. Lu Xiaoyi disappeared into the extra-dimensional space again after Angor's response. His meaning was clear: I'm just kidding. At least one thing was clear: Angor's clown was an attack incarnation with a strong and mysterious power flowing in his body. When Angor's patient opened his eyes, the death aura in his eyes made even Lu Xiaoyi, who had experienced hundreds of battles, feel a little scared. This guy's performance in a real battle was very different from when he had retreated without a fight when they first met. Therefore, he continued to test the waters as if nothing had happened. The two people opposite him did the same. They did not show any anger after being teased. It was as if they were just playing a friendly joke between friends. What a tough opponent. Lu Xiaoyi also acted as if nothing had happened. He continued to test each other and consider the feasibility of his next move. A question arose in his mind. Who's the leader and who's the subordinate in their cooperation? In theory, the tall and mighty god Maladi should be the leader. But intuition told him that it was not true. In terms of danger, Angor was even more unpredictable. Is this a trap? It's getting more and more interesting. Chapter 1859. Lu Xiaoyi decided to increase the intensity of his sword raise. The essence of a fight was that when one's fist was strong enough, it would change the nature of the battle. Angor was the first to lose. It wasn't that he was weak, but he was always the one getting hit. The doll can't continue like this. The recovery time is increasing, and the amount of blood it needs is also increasing. Now that the swordsman is increasing his strength, we can't continue like this. The swordsman is moving around, and there's nowhere for him to go. Marathi agreed with his judgment. According to the current pace, it would be difficult for them to find a way to win. The swordsman hated jumping around you. If you couldn't control him, you could only wait for him to make the first move. Their strategy was based on the swordsman taking the initiative to attack. They had prepared a lot of traps for him, but the swordsman was too cunning to fall for them. He only attacked from afar, and it didn't matter if it was ineffective. He looked like he was going to drag this out until the end of time. Of course, he couldn't drag this out forever, but it was obvious that he wasn't going to get what they wanted. If that's the case, let's get into the rhythm. We can't just keep doing this. We can't keep hiding when we have to. But once we start, we won't be able to stop. You have to be mentally prepared. The two of them reached a consensus. When Lu Xiaoyi came out of the dimensional space again, he could clearly feel the difference. A snake and a clown were pouncing on him. The snake was a cobra that Marathi wore around his neck. In the legends of the Hung River, it represented death and time. But he had to find out more about it. The clown was bouncing around and moving quickly. However, no matter how fast these two things were, they were still no match for his Katon-style escape technique. Among all the magical objects that could move, including human cultivators, there was no existence that could keep up with his rhythm. The flying sword accurately hit the two magical objects, but as expected, it had no effect. But he also understood the roots of the two magical objects. The two magical objects were illusory objects that couldn't be controlled by magic power. The cobra was a 7-foot-time snake, and each foot represented a stage in a person's life: infant, child, teenager, young adult, old age, and death. This was a snake that could find the past of humans. The clown, on the other hand, was an existence with a split personality. Kindness and evil, gentleness and irascibility, impulsiveness and cautiousness. He was a complete contradiction. If he was tainted by it, it would expand a certain personality of the cultivator to the maximum. That was because humans were inherently contradictory. They possessed every type of personality, but they would only display a certain unique trait under the suppression of their rationality. It wasn't that a kind and noble person wouldn't have any evil thoughts, but rather that their evil thoughts would be suppressed to the point where it was barely discernible. Similarly, an evil person would occasionally have a kind side. However, the role of a clown was to infinitely amplify a cultivator's personality and make it infinitely extreme. This was Lu Xiaoyi's first time coming into contact with these two types of magic items. Cobra can pull the opponent back to the past, but this past is not the reincarnation of your past. Instead, it's your past in the modern world, such as your youth. This was the difference between Hengyi system and other systems. The Taoists and Buddhists of the main world emphasized the reincarnation of the past, but Hengyi system defined the past as the past of this life. There was a huge difference here. What were they trying to do? It wasn't hard to guess. However, because of the cobra and the clown's attacks, they couldn't be too far away. They had to coordinate with each other from a distance to give the two magic items a chance to get close. Otherwise, if they stayed still, the two magic items would never be able to catch up with the swordsman. Marathi took the lead. His divine form moved, and the black long arrow began to shoot with all his might. No more holding back. Anji's various Tao states were still delayed. Under the current circumstances, the so-called forbidden arts were meaningless. Only the most fundamental changes in the Tao states were the best way to supplement them. The effect might not be great, but even if it only affected a little, it would create an opportunity for the two magic items. At the same time, the waist drum vibrated, and the invasion of the divine sense was magnified to the extreme. The two geniuses of the exterior clearly understood the true meaning of the so-called battle. Lu Xiaoyi didn't panic. After 2,000 years of fighting, there was nothing that could cause him to panic. His opponent made the first move. At least in terms of patience, he was slightly better. He couldn't escape into the dimensional space again. It wasn't that he couldn't, but if he escaped into the dimensional space and came out again, he might be caught by the two magic items. This was a matter of probability. Their senses were completely different from that of a human's. In some aspects, they had unpredictable abilities. In battle, he never relied on luck. Was his opponent trying to pull him into his past? Could it be a youth? Or a teenager? Even if it was pulled in, it didn't mean that he would lose. He didn't even know what would happen if he lost as a teenager. However, he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to truly complete a wave of storm-like attacks. I'm not afraid of your desire, I'm only afraid of your lack of desire. Desire was a double-edged sword. It was hard to say who would be caught by it. As his figure turned and fled, the Sparrow Palace flapped. His mental strength spread out and mixed with the waist drum's divine sense disturbance. It wasn't resistance, nor was it neutralizing. Instead, it was making things worse. In the blink of an eye, the divine sense disturbance in the battlefield increased tremendously. Marathi slapped with all his strength, and Go added fuel to the fire, and Lu Xiaoyi perfectly complemented them. Like a band at a party, the drummer, bassist, and keyboardist achieved a spiritual and artistic resonance in an instant. The spiritual sublimation was loud and intense. There were many ways to disrupt the divine sense disturbance, but Marathi had never thought that there would be such a way to destroy the enemy at the cost of one's own life. In such a perilous situation, the flying sword lost control, and the black arrow became dizzy. All the methods based on the divine sense were ineffective in an instant. They even lost the ability to sense each other's position. Sensing that something was wrong, Marathi immediately stopped slapping the waist drum. However, it was too late. Although he stopped slapping, he couldn't take it back. Resonance. The laws of physics that humans in this world had not yet grasped played an amazing role in this moment. In his previous life, a group of soldiers could collapse a bridge as long as they took the right step. But now, the waist drum with a trace of divinity wasn't a divine object after all. It was blown to pieces by a sudden peak resonance. Lu Xiaoyi was the only one who knew what was going to happen. It came from his never-ending research on the divine sense disturbance. Therefore, before the resonance was initiated, the flying swords were aimed straight at Marathi. Without using any divine sense control, they were flying in a straight line. However, he was in the middle of a large-scale maneuver. Therefore, when the resonance broke the waist drum and all the divine sense disturbance disappeared, the black arrow was not in the same direction at all. However, the flying swords were all aimed at one person. It was Marathi. Chapter 1860. Before Marathi could recover from the shock of losing his waist drum, the swords had already arrived. Although he could not control them with his consciousness, the seven-ant sword spirit still managed to change the direction of most of the swords at the last moment, allowing them to accurately find their target. Marathi did not even have time to wave his trident. He had no other choice but to use his disguise to deal with the swords. The Superman form was cut down, followed by the gentle form and then the terror form. It was only until the Lin Jiaxiang that he managed to stabilize himself. However, in this short period of time, Lu Xiaoyi seemed to have changed into a different person. He changed from a calm and carefree swordsman to a crazy butcher. The swords grew from 1 million to almost 3 million, covering the sky and the earth. The light of the entire galaxy increased. This was the situation Marathi was facing after his consecutive disguises. A black bow? How could he have the time to pull the bowstring? Not to mention the countless swords coming down. How could a long arrow block them? Everyone had their own secrets, but this swordsman had the most. Other people would only hide their tail and wave it out to hit people when facing the scenery. However, this swordsman only left his tail out and hid his entire body. This was not his habit, but this was the specialty of a swordsman. They would only reveal themselves when they needed to attack. If they revealed themselves too early, it would be easy to scare people away. The swords gathered, aiming to take Maradi's life. The change in rhythm was too fast. The waist drum was broken, and the trident could not block the endless swords. Other than disguise, Maradi had no other way to protect himself. Furthermore, this was not the time to protect himself. Wasn't this the moment they took the initiative to change? Angor opened his eyes. As he recovered, a cloud of gray fog spread out. This was the power of the plague. It covered a large area, but this method was not suitable in this situation. The Grand Tao of Pestilence had never been ranked among cultivators in battles of magical powers. This was because cultivators needed time to take effect. Lu Xiaoyi did not have time to think about why Angor would use such a method in such an unsuitable situation. Did he have no other choice? Or did he have other plans? However, once he made his move, he would not stop his plan. Now was the best time to kill Maradi. His defensive layer had already been broken. How long could he last by relying on the face transformation? It had not been easy for him to wait until the other party had used all his strength to harass his waist drum's consciousness. Only then did he have the opportunity to use resonance to break it. If he had slowed down, who knew if this fellow would have used another waist drum? It would be nothing more than inviting the god to send down a brand new godhead and restore the godly image to its original state. Then, his patience would go down the drain. Both sides could only continue to waste time like this, which was not something he wanted to see. Maradi's transformation continued. This time, he had gone through almost all of the transformations: Lin Jia form, Terror form, Gentle form, Superman form, Three Faces form, Dancing King form, Glass Master form, Half-Woman form, Ice Frost form, Flame form. He wanted to find an opportunity to escape from the transformations. But he was disappointed. The swordsman's swords were too many and too heavy. It was a complete barbarian destruction, not giving him a chance to transform or summon the godhead again. At this point, their plan could be said to be a great success. They had successfully lured out the swordsman's full strength and put themselves in danger. This was actually within their expectations. The swordsman would not take the bait if they did not put themselves in a dead end. This was the most disgusting thing about a combat practitioner who was good at running. You had to give them some benefits. Let them see hope. Now, it was time to see the results. There were many checkpoints. How many could the swordsman break through? He was very curious. Once again, he transformed into the Lin Jia form. This was also the root form. Only in this state could he return to his original form of the lice. However, the transformation was not endless. It was equivalent to a reincarnation cycle. In order to activate the next transformation, it would require a short period of time. Therefore, it was not wise to transform into the lice during battle unless he had a special need. Lu Xiaoyi immediately became vigilant the moment Maradi transformed into the lice. Having killed many practitioners of the Hung River, he was not unfamiliar with the main deity of the Hung River. At the very least, he had some understanding of the lice from various ancient records. Therefore, before the lice was fully formed, he did three things. Millions of sword lights converged into a circle as they surged forward. They were arranged so tightly that they looked like a huge mirror. At the same time, he leaped into the air and instantly closed in on Maradi. With seven hand in hand, he slashed down. At close range, he opened his mouth and said, "Rulu." The water of the Hung River can never cover the light of the Milky Way. While he was doing this, the lice goddess divine form that had already taken form opened the third eye on its forehead. An awe-inspiring divine light suddenly shot out, carrying with it a power that could destroy everything. However, this invincible divine light hit a wall in front of the huge mirror. It was not cancelled out, but refracted. Seven ants slashed down like lightning. Marathi, who still had one last trump card, turned pale because his water jar abandoned him at the most crucial moment. It did not protect him like the Hung River should have. He was judged by the prophecy. This sword was unstoppable. It contained all of Lu Xiaoyi's strength. It successfully slashed open Marathi's neck, including the skull necklace that was hanging around his neck. Then, it continued down to his chest, waist, and abdomen. The brutal sword aura instantly destroyed Marathi's body, but the strong vitality of a half-deity prevented him from dying immediately. He was still smiling because when Lu Xiaoyi slashed open the skull necklace, the necklace seemed to have come alive and turned into a cobra with its head up and tongue out. The cobra lightning was so close that it bit the web between Lu Xiaoyi's thumb and index finger that was holding the sword. He did not feel any pain, but he knew that something must have happened. The celestial phenomenon rose, and Marathi became a thing of the past. Not far away, Ngu sighed. You got what you asked for. Let's go, Mr. Marathi. You have achieved your goal. Leave the rest to me. Looking at Lu Xiaoyi, he explained in a good-natured manner. Ngu knows that he can't kill you alone. Even with my help, it won't work. We are just demons, but you are a freak. That's why he used his own death to set up this trap. When you get close to me, the time snake will bite you. The skull necklace is the real snake, and the one outside is just an incarnation. When the snake bites you, it will take you to a certain time period in the past, and of course, my patient. Why? What will happen? You will know when the result is out. Well, my 3 incarnations, the doll and the clown, are actually not very useful. Only the patient can go back to your past. Now that we can't do anything because of the past, why don't we wait and see who will walk out in the end? Chapter 1861. When Lu Xiaoyi got up from the bed, he felt that his waist and back were aching. This could be the after-effects of coming back from the sand kiln, or was it because he read the secret books that his mother gave him last night? This shouldn't be the case. Haste makes waste. Such a simple logic wasn't hard to understand. After putting on his clothes, he was still a little cold. There was something flowing down his nose, and his throat was a little tight. As he thought of this, he couldn't help but cough a few times. He had caught a cold. His mood hadn't been very good recently. 8 of his friends had gone to the sand kiln to explore. In the end, 2 of them had left, and 2 of them were lying down. Everyone was grounded at home, and no one could go out. Perhaps because of this, his mood was a little low, and he fell ill. At this time, it should be time for him to pay his respects to his mother, but he chose not to go. In this world, it was unfilial to not pay respects to his mother because of a small illness. However, he was a soul that had transmigrated, and he had his own views on hygiene. Compared to infecting his family with a cold, paying respects to his mother wasn't a big deal. What happened next was, of course, a series of stories in the big house. His mother and Aunt Kai came to visit him, the only child. Even if he had made a huge mistake and caused a huge disaster, the only child was still the only child. They were about to call for a doctor, but Lu Xiaoyi stopped them. This kind of small illness was nothing to him, and it would pass in 2 days. For him, who was in the prime of his life, his body was in its best condition. What illness did he have to call for a doctor immediately? But this time, there was a problem with his judgment. He hadn't recovered from his cold for a few days, and he started to have a high fever. His whole body was cold and shivering. He had reached the point where he had no choice but to call for a doctor. After more than 10 days, he didn't know if it was because of the doctor's brilliant methods, or because his body's resistance was strong, but he got through it and slowly got better. He could walk on the ground and eat some light food. But an even bigger problem began to appear. A large number of people in Lu province fell ill, and their symptoms were exactly the same as Lu Xiaoyi's, including the 2 old madams. Lu Xiaoyi realized the seriousness of the problem, but he couldn't do anything about it. He didn't have an official position, and he hadn't really entered the path of cultivation. He was just a good-for-nothing with a bad reputation. Could it be a rather serious flu? This was also the doctor's opinion. However, in all his years of medical practice, he had never seen an influenza spread so quickly. Of course, they were not called influenza, but epidemic. Even the doctor was not spared. Furthermore, as time passed, patients with the same symptoms began to appear sporadically in Lu Province's neighboring markets, shops, and pharmacies. The few old doctors in Poo City came to a conclusion and finally confirmed that this was an epidemic. It was spreading rapidly, and there were already cases of people dying from it. Don't go out, the door is closed. The money was sent in through the people outside. Maintain ventilation, wash your hands frequently, and don't gather together. Lu Xiaoyi made his decision. In the current Lu province, the two madams were bedridden. All sorts of matters, big and small, were on his shoulders, yet his decision was so unreasonable. Don't we need to go to the state capital to get a doctor? Ping'an was very puzzled. He was also one of the few people in Lu province who had no symptoms. Could it be that his body's resistance was strong, and he was in the prime of his life? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. No need. It's too late. At night, he went to his mother's bedside and held his mother's hand tightly. His mother was very weak now, and she was sometimes awake and sometimes unconscious. When she was awake, Lu Xiaoyi told her his decision. News has already spread in Poo City, saying that the few of us bumped into something bad in the sand kiln, and then it brought disaster to everyone. Lu Yaoshi shook her head. It's not my son. My son has the protection of one Kuei Xing, so nothing can harm him. Isn't little E better? This means that the heavens are very bright. Lu Xiaoyi said softly, Mother, this is actually a simple epidemic. It's purely within the scope of medical science. Those people are ignorant, so they spread such rumors. You don't have to take it to heart. Your son can handle it. However, medical problems can only be solved by common medical knowledge. Our Lu province was the first batch of people to discover the epidemic, and I'm also the first. This is the truth. No one can deny it. Now that there is no medicine to treat the epidemic, how can there be a cure for it every time it happens? Therefore, we can only bear it ourselves. We don't go out because we don't want to spread this epidemic to more people. I think Father would have done the same if he were alive. Mother, your son has dragged you down. Lu Yaoshi smiled. Her son had grown up and knew what to do and what not to do. Yes, if Major Lu was alive, he would have done the same. This was the integrity of a true scholar official. He was not afraid of making mistakes, but he was afraid of not having the correct attitude towards mistakes. Compared to this, what was life and death? His heart relaxed, and he fell asleep again. Lu Xiaoyi looked up at the sky. He had the dream of saving the world, and had the nature of being kind to others, but at that time, he could not do more. This was a problem of ability, not a problem of attitude. Therefore, he did not feel guilty. During the day, one of the prefect's aides called Huyong came to see him. He was a very ordinary official, but he could feel that this person was not ordinary. This was intuition. This person was very likely to be the mutant that the seven of them wanted to be. Huyong examined Lu Xiaoyi's body and carefully questioned him about everything that happened in the sand kiln. He didn't find anything special, but in the end, Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but tell Huyong the most important way to deal with epidemics in his previous life: quarantine. He was very clear that this was something that even the government could not do. This required a powerful dynasty and scientific knowledge. This could only happen in his previous life. However, he still had a glimmer of hope. In this world, there was also a very powerful system of power, and that was the power of cultivation. He did not know any cultivators. His friends were all second-rate. Therefore, he could only tell this to Huyong. He did not know if he would listen. Could he pass this message to the higher-ups? This was all he could do. A sense of powerlessness took control of him, making him thirst for power more than ever. The situation was getting worse and worse, and it was on the verge of losing control. More and more people died. At first, it was just a rumor, but later, the reality of the people around him appeared, and then family, friends, and neighbors. Pooh City was turning into hell. The people who were still alive began to madly retaliate against Lu Province. Although they did not dare to rush in, for fear of being infected by the epidemic, the bricks and tiles never stopped. The source of food had long been cut off. When the merchants heard that they were from Lu Province, they were not willing to sell anything to them, even if they offered a high price. Under such a harsh environment, the people of Lu Province began to die of illness one by one, including Aunt Kai, and then his mother. Lu Xiaoyi looked up at the sky. He was depressed and could not vent his frustration. He began to doubt the necessity of his existence. For a kind person, everything that happened was unbearable. Chapter 1862. In the end, only 2 people from Lu Province were left. Lu Xiaoyi, who had survived, and Ping'an, who was immune to poison. Lu Xiaoyi insisted on going to the streets every day. He walked along the streets and told everyone about his experience with the epidemic. He told everyone to wash their hands and not to gather together, even though he would be chased out by the residents most of the time and covered in bruises from being thrown bricks and tiles. The only thing they did not dare to do was to stay too close to him. They were afraid that they would be infected by the terrible epidemic. The most they left him was, "Troublemaker Lu, why don't you die? You've caused so many deaths. You shouldn't be living in this world anymore. Shouldn't you give everyone an explanation? Shouldn't you be accompanying your mother in the underworld? How can you still have the face to talk nonsense on the streets and continue to harm people?" However, none of this could stop Lu Xiaoyi. At night, he would return to Lu Province, which was like a graveyard, to rest. Then, he would come out in the morning and continue to explain to everyone about how to avoid catching the epidemic. Looking at the loyal Ping'an, Lu Xiaoyi asked, "Do you also think that I deserve to die?" Ping'an was submissive. "Young master, it's not like that. I just feel too lonely and bored. Everyone is gone. It's not you who deserves to die, it's all of us who deserve to die." Ping'an's family, including his mother, wife, and several children. The reason they were still with Lu Xiaoyi was because of the deep-rooted habit they had developed over the past few decades. They did not feel that they should do so. Lu Province was empty, and soon Pooh City was empty as well. Due to the limited execution of this world's dynasty and their carelessness in the beginning of the epidemic was not controlled in the end. It began to spread around Pooh City and spread. Perhaps one day, it would spread to the entire Zhaoya kingdom and the entire mainland. Pooh City was empty. The remaining people had nowhere to go. There were no targeted drugs or effective methods, so they could only rely on their own bodies to survive. Funerals were held every day. Later, no one cared about such things anymore. They wrapped themselves in straw mats and buried them hastily. There was no hope, and they could not see the future. The late ban prevented the people of Pooh City from leaving the city. However, the remaining people were already immune to the epidemic. They were the strong ones who had been eliminated by nature. He couldn't explain this to them because no one listened to him even when it came to the most basic knowledge of epidemic prevention. The only thing these survivors could do was to direct their anger at the first infected person, Lu Xiaoyi. Everyone unanimously demanded that Lu Xiaoyi commit suicide to appease the anger of the people. The remaining few officials probably had the same idea. They did not even bother to cover it up. Everyone looked at Lu Xiaoyi with the same expression, "Why aren't you dead yet?" In Lu Province, Lu Xiaoyi and Ping'an were munching on pancakes. They didn't have much food left. "Ping'an, do you think this young master is a kind person?" Lu Xiaoyi swallowed the pancake in small bites. This was the first time he had experienced something like this as a second-generation heir. Moreover, it was likely that he would not be able to avoid it in the future. Ping'an pulled a long face. "Of course young master is. Ever since he was young. It's always been like that. Lu Xiaoyi said, do kind people deserve to die? Ping'an was speechless. He was now a walking corpse. He had no interest in anything until the day he collapsed like everyone else. Lu Xiaoyi muttered to himself, when the epidemic came, no one wanted it to be like that. Everyone said that it was me, Lu Xiaoyi, who brought disaster to this city. Perhaps. But if it wasn't for me, would the epidemic not have appeared? No, it would still have appeared. This has nothing to do with any individual. It's Mother Nature's choice. It's telling us that it's time to make changes in certain aspects. He did not care if Ping'an understood him. The most important thing was to vent his anger. My mother taught me to be kind since I was young. I have always done so. I have never given up on any chance to prove my kindness. But I want to tell you, heaven is watching. There's a bottom line to doing evil. There's also a bottom line to being kind. Lu Xiaoyi was almost roaring. I won't take on responsibilities that I shouldn't take on just because I want to fulfill the wishes of others, even if it's the wishes of the vast majority of people. This isn't a matter of being kind or not. This is a matter of principle. I can't become an excuse for people to blame me for no reason just because I'm kind. Let alone Lu Province, Pu City, even if the whole world thinks that I deserve to die, I won't die. That was what Lu Xiaoyi had said, and that was what he had done. When the epidemic spread in Zhaoye Kingdom, the closure of Pu City was in vain. Lu Xiaoyi left the place where he was born and raised. He carried the 13 secret manuals and brought his only loyal servant, Ping'an, out of Pu City. Everywhere he went, he spared no effort to pass on his method to others. He never hid his identity. Even though the legend of the former Sima Lu's son being the source of the epidemic had already spread throughout the Kingdom of Illumination, he was still calm and collected as he went about his own business. Until he reached Zhaoye City, his efforts did not have much effect on the spread of the epidemic. In front of Mother Nature, humans were so small, especially those who had no power and no special powers. The gates of Zhaoye City were tightly shut, and he was denied entry. A Taoist stood on the city wall and shouted, "Junior of the Lu family. How dare you walk around when you're infected and pollute the place? Aren't you afraid of being punished by the heavens and struck by lightning?" Lu Xiaoyi was still calm. "Taoist, you're a cultivator. You should know the reason better than ordinary people. This is not something a person can do. Let alone a mortal like me, even a cultivator might not be able to do it. In that case, why do you have to follow the crowd and be so aggressive?" The Taoist shouted, "Because I know, that's why I'm here to advise you. Follow the trend of the people's hearts, regardless of right or wrong. If you commit suicide here, at the very least, you can get rid of the demons in the hearts of all the people in the world. With hope, it will ignite their desire to live. There are countless people alive. This logic is not difficult to understand. How can a learned scholar like you not understand?" Lu Xiaoyi looked at him. "I can die. For example, you can kill me right now. But I won't kill myself. This is not in line with my philosophy." The Taoist shouted, "Your death can save millions of people, and you don't want to?" Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. "You're contradicting yourself. Heaven is strong, and people should be strong. If my death can only ignite the desire to live, then they don't have to live." The Taoist's voice was like thunder. "I know you're interested in Tao and have the heart of cultivation. Then you should know about the reincarnation of cultivators. You've done a good deed today, and you'll be successful in your reincarnation. On the other hand, you'll be entangled with karma. Not to mention reincarnation, even your bloodline in Lu Province may not be able to continue. Are you still unwilling to do that?" Lu Xiaoyi was very serious. "No." Ping'an, who was behind him, cried out in sorrow. He could not bear the pressure anymore. Maybe the young master could, but he could not. A dagger pierced his heart. He sat down slowly. "Young master, when you go to hell, Ping'an will continue to serve you." The Taoist turned into a celestial phenomenon. "The whole world spurns you. Are you still stubborn and want to live in this world? Lu Xiaoyi looked at him coldly. Don't say that I haven't let down the world. Even if I did, so what? In an instant, the world collapsed. Ping'an turned into a clown struggling on the ground. The plague particles that filled the sky disappeared without a trace. Chapter 1863. In the Milky Way, Lu Xiaoyi stared at Ngu without saying a word. An Ji's face was as white as a sheet. The clown and the patient were nowhere to be seen. You win. Our Luoying orthodoxy has always respected the strong. I have many friends in the exterior realm. If you want to achieve the Great Way, I think you can't do it without support from all sides. I'm willing to follow your lead and act according to your discretion. Ngu knew he couldn't run away. The distance was too close. If he tried to escape, the flying sword would catch up with him. Losing 2 of his 3 incarnations had a great impact on him. They were part of his spirit and blood essence. They were not ordinary objects that could be easily discarded. Therefore, he extended an olive branch. This was not rare in the recent history of the Luoying orthodoxy. Since they had declined, they should have the mentality of a declining person. He was very good at this point. He was a demi-immortal. His words were law. He didn't have the idea of obeying first and then rebelling. As long as he was a rational cultivator, he would be able to make the most appropriate choice. Moreover, the one who had a conflict of interest was Marathi, not him. Seeing his opponent's river of swords ready to attack, Ngu frowned. He was still elegant and graceful. There are no eternal friends, but there are eternal interests. The sword light slashed down, and the celestial phenomenon was formed. Lu Xiaoyi murmured, but there is an eternal mother. Even if it was just a fictional scene and a part of history that didn't exist, it was still unforgivable. This was a fierce and dangerous battle. Even with his strong strength, he couldn't completely crush his opponents, especially when there were 2 of them. They were willing to die and had very special means. At the demi-immortal level, there would be more and more special battles like this. There would be fewer and fewer people who would fight with him openly. This was also the burden of fame. Everyone knew that Lu Xiaoyi's sword skills were unparalleled. Of course, he had to start from other aspects. This was already the 2nd time someone had invaded the modern realms past. The first time was when he was a Yuanying on a mission to the Heaven's Choice continent. Monk Xinghui pulled him into a dream. This was the 2nd time. He had no choice but to be vigilant when this kind of situation happened again and again. Although he survived every time because he had a different philosophy from normal people, you couldn't expect him to pass so smoothly every time. What if it failed? What if he was pulled back even earlier, before he possessed this body? Since he had already treated his identity as the young master of Lu province as part of his past, he had to bear the consequences of his past. At the end of the day, Yanming's mental power still lacked sufficient means to defend against such a mental invasion. There were also gains, such as successfully casting judgment prophecy. In fact, he had been adjudicating since the beginning of the battle. He adjudicated that his opponent's waist drum had lost its effectiveness, that Maladi had withdrawn from his divine form, and so on. Unfortunately, he hadn't been able to succeed. He was temporarily unable to judge the actions that the other party had already taken, and he was far inferior to the blind old man in this aspect. It wasn't until the last time that he finally succeeded in executing a skill that his opponent hadn't used yet. It was also a crucial success. It didn't mean that he couldn't kill without judgment prophecy, but it would be much more troublesome. When the eternal river of Pitcher filled the air, it would be another round of fighting. The 12 types of innate Tao did give him countless tactical combinations, but he had to admit that this was far from everything. The comprehensive application of the mixed Tao state should also be put on the agenda as soon as possible. He had dabbled in this aspect before, but he looked at it more from the perspective of a swordsman. It was faster, fiercer, and stronger, but he had neglected the fact that there were actually many more magical areas after the mixed Tao state. At this time, he should look at it from the perspective of a Dharma cultivator. The battle began to diversify, and there would be very few people who would dare to fight him with swords. This battle took a long time, and when he jumped out of the Milky Way, the outcome was basically decided. There were less than 50 exterior masters left, and less than 30 interior masters. The original numbers were more than double, but now it was less than double. Regardless of whether it was a tug-of-war or a battle, anyone with a discerning eye could see that the exterior masters were powerless. Qing Xian's consciousness said, "They are considering whether to withdraw, which is inevitable. A few of the strong ones have been killed, especially the one with judgment prophecy." Lu Xiaoyi laughed, "I didn't kill them, they ran away." Qing Xian was very interested, "How do you make prophecies?" Lu Xiaoyi spread his hands, "What else can I do, just endure it." I have never encountered such a situation before, but fortunately, his prophecy is not a death prophecy, so there is still time. I think when someone takes the second step, it will be easy to make a death prophecy, and that will be the real danger. There are 3 Tao states: interception of fate, karma, and impermanence. You have to master at least one to be able to break it. He had nothing to hide from a friend like Qing Xian. There were many places where they would need to work together in the future, not only before the change of the era, but also after the change of the era. "You killed the demon of Hung River, Marathi?" Lu Xiaoyi was stunned. "If I didn't kill him, should I keep him for the new year?" "From what you said." Qing Xian sighed. "The young god in charge of the attack and defense of Hung River is Amir Khan, Marathi's master. It's not a big deal, I killed him. Anyway, there is no reconciliation, and it is impossible to find the key to break the defense of Hung River through him. Amir Khan, remember this name, you must eliminate the source of trouble." Lu Xiaoyi sneered, "It's not just Amir Khan. It's all the sweat. If these young gods of Hung River run away, it will be a big problem for us. A young god who is determined to take revenge by hook or by crook is the most difficult to deal with. I don't have time to chase such a person across the universe." While they were talking, the exterior masters had already made a decision. Unlike the ancient cultivators, the current cultivators were more flexible. The key was that none of them had entered the decline state, but the methods of the upper state were not recognized by the interior masters. In this sense, there was no essential difference. It was more like a sense of existence. Marathi's death made the exterior masters no longer care about the life and death of Hung River. This page had turned over. They had done their best, that was all. The exterior masters scattered, and the white eye disappeared. Only the interior masters were left in the vast void. There were 37 people in total, including those who were unfavorable in the battle and withdrew. In the whole process of tug-of-war, 6 interior masters died here. Who could say for sure whether it was worth it or not? These people began to fly towards Hung River. Next was the harvest season. No one complained that Hung River boundary had not been broken yet. To them, they were the protagonists of the changes in the universe. Of course, everything should be led by them. Young, with endless potential, this was their belief. Chapter 1864. In the Hangi boundary, Amir couldn't suppress his sorrow. He knew that his disciple had already left for the Hangi boundary. As his master, he knew his disciple's nature too well. Although he looked rebellious, he had a strong sense of responsibility. When the Hangi boundary was in trouble, he would definitely fight to the death. It was a pity that this disciple, who had countless evildoers in the cultivation world and could take whatever he wanted in the past, couldn't decide the direction of the general trend in the collision between the inner and outer Jing heavens. This was the fate of cultivators. It couldn't be said that the white-haired people were sending off the black-haired people, but it was also the case of those in their twilight years sending off those in the morning sun. The cruel truth was in front of them. They didn't know the dynamics of the 2 sub-battlefields, but in the main battlefield, they were already in a desperate situation. They had 3 considerations on how to protect the Hangi boundary. First was the help of the outer Jing heavens, which was also the most solid support. Unfortunately, it was gone now. Second was the two sub-battlefields, especially the attack of the Blue Sky battlefield. If it succeeded, it would have a psychological impact on the invading alliance. It wasn't clear yet, but he had a vague feeling that the situation wasn't good. Finally, it was the attack in defense of the Hangi boundary. The key was the grand membrane of heaven and earth. It was the fusion with the holy river and the trace of godhood that was obtained. This kind of defense was very effective for normal yang spirits. It wasn't necessarily indestructible, but it had to pay a huge price. For an alliance, it was difficult to arrange who would go in and who would wait outside. If 300 yang spirits entered at once, they would definitely be able to break through. However, this was not the way cultivators fought. This was not the mortal world, and there was no such thing as a suicide squad. Everyone's life was precious to their orthodoxy. Who should sacrifice themselves? But if the outer Jing Heavens group retreated and the inner Jing Heavens group came, it would be completely different. Because they were half immortals, people who had taken a step forward. In some aspects, their abilities couldn't be compared to ordinary yang spirits. This was what he was worried about. The enemy was so powerful that it made people despair. At this point, other than the unity of the people, there were no other reinforcements. In these two universe wars, they had already used their connections to the extreme. No one was willing to listen to him. When the Zerg-winged witches stood on their side, they naturally stood on the opposite side of the mainstream world of self-cultivators. It wasn't that no one else had noticed this, but everyone was only concerned about the temporary benefits in front of them. They had forgotten that if they wanted to survive in this chaotic cultivation world, no matter what, they had to squeeze into the mainstream and not do the opposite. Someone was questioning his strategic arrangement. He wondered if it was too risky to strengthen the heaven and earth great membrane. Should they arrange the formation in an echelon and block it in layers? Should he make arrangements for all the orthodoxies in Heng River? For example, self-destructing the temple? Destroying spirit veins and mineral deposits? Establishing a hidden organization among the people? An appropriate seed plan? A plan to perish together with the enemy? Wait a minute. He had thought of everything he could think of, but they were all rejected by Amir Khan. Do we need to divide it into layers? We're on the first floor. Only the grand membrane of heaven and earth. Gather all the forces, including those above Yuanying. Enter the sacred river and be with it. 110 yang spirits and more than 600 primordial spirit cultivators. 3,000 Ying gods. 20,000 Yuanying. Don't leave a single one behind, let everyone enter. If we're here, Heng River will be here. If Heng River perishes, we'll be buried with it. Divide into layers? How many layers should we divide into? Let the enemy eat us one by one? Only by putting us to death can we be reborn. There's no way back. Amir Khan's divine sense surged in the minds of the Heng River cultivators. Even the Yang Spirit Grand Sacrifice no longer refuted him, because reality had proven that he was right and they were wrong all these years. Why don't we have a backup plan? Because it's meaningless. The more we arrange, the more ruthless the invaders will purge us. They don't even need to find a reason. Why don't we perish together? Because this land is ours. One day, it will return to us. We can't leave behind a devastated world for future generations. Why don't we lead the so-called seeds into the universe? We can take out hundreds of perfected lords and hundreds of floating rafts. But where are we going? If we leave the sacred river, even the gods will abandon us. Will there still be orthodoxies in Heng River? We are not the Taoists and Buddhists of the main world. There are countless places in the universe that are willing to accept them. We only have one Heng River, one route. If we leave here, we are nothing, not to mention establishing orthodoxies in other places. That's just an excuse cowards find for themselves. Someone asked, Amir Khan, if that's the case, why do you think we will eventually regain control of this land? Amir Khan said firmly, culture. Because the sacred river and the Hung River are unique cultures in the universe. The invaders can occupy this place, but they will never be able to change everyone's faith, because that is the faith of 10 billion people. This kind of faith is not something that can be given by a few temples. It is deeply rooted in our history, our words, our language, our habits, and our legends. It is immortal and exists with the heavens and earth. It had to be said that Amir Khan was not only a powerful cultivator, but also an outstanding speaker. His words resonated with everyone present. You, us, every cultivator who sacrificed their lives for Hung River will return to the embrace of the sacred river mother after death, and then start over in the long cycle of reincarnation. When we meet again after many lifetimes, and reminisce about the past, that will be the day when Hung River regains its glory. Amir Khan successfully aroused the courage of all the people of Hung River. This was also the only thing they could rely on to hold on. In terms of numbers, not to mention the Yuanying, just the Xinjiang alone added up to nearly 4,000. This was not a small number. When everyone fought with their lives on the line, even the Yang gods had to retreat. Although they did not have the ability to kill enemies above their level like the Xianyuan swordsmen, and in terms of strength, the grand sacrifice of the same realm was slightly inferior to the top Yang gods selected from the main world, but fighting in their own sacred river would give them a certain amount of strength. With the absolute advantage in numbers, even if it was 10 for 1, could the alliance bear it? This was Amir Khan's final struggle. It was also the most correct response. If everything came true, they did not need to lose more than half, just more than 30%, and some of the worlds in the alliance would not be able to hold on. They were a whole, and the other side was an alliance. The so-called alliance could be called an alliance when they saw victory and benefits, but once they met with resistance, they would be a mob. The last chance for Hung River realm was to use their own sacrifice to turn the alliance of the main world into a mob. This was a difficult task, but as long as there was hope, it was worth fighting for. Chapter 1865. The Nang Sky Group rushed forward in high spirits. Their victory over an exterior master had made them feel complacent. Compared to that, a small world was nothing. Qing Xian, on the other hand, was worried for nothing. The biggest problem with the Hengi realm is that if we take it down, how do we control them? We've predicted countless times before, but we're not as good as them. Such a large realm, if we take it down and don't manage it, it'll definitely rise again in less than 1,000 years. The best way is to migrate there, but where can we find such a large population that can assimilate tens of billions of people? If we have too few people, we'll be assimilated. If we have too many people, we won't be lucky. As she talked to herself, she saw Lu Xiaoyi's absent-minded expression and felt a little angry. Hey, I'm asking you. Don't act like a dead dog. I'm not your incompetent military advisor. Why do I have to worry about everything? Lu Xiaoyi said calmly, what's the hurry? I'm not smart. I can't understand distant things. I only think about what's in front of me. What do we do after we take it over? Have you taken it over now? The bride hasn't even entered the bridal chamber and you're already thinking about what position to take. You want to blow the flute in the jade door, but the bride has barbs on her teeth. You want to. Qing Xian interrupted him rudely, seriously, you're running below your navel after 3 sentences. You're a half-immortal, not a street gangster. Lu Xiaoyi retorted, can a half-immortal be a gangster? I don't think there's any difference. Okay, let's talk about business. I don't know how to build, but I'm good at destruction. To make the Hengi realm unable to rise again, the key lies in their so-called sacred river. It's definitely a good idea to send in some spirits to destroy it. They'll definitely think that the Hengi River coexists with heaven and earth. As long as the realm and the Hengi River exist, they'll make a comeback sooner or later. But what they don't know is that heaven and earth aren't necessarily immortal. Seeing the change of eras and the changes of the universe, I think the Hengi realm can also change. The two of them thought about bad ideas along the way and soon arrived near the Hengi River. The two armies met. Would there be cheers? Passionate hugs? Tears of excitement? No, that was the right of the mortal world. To them, such feelings did not exist. On the contrary, the half-immortal monsters looked at the sun god seniors with disdain. Are you guys drinking tea and doing research while we are fighting to the death? Dozens of days had passed, and the skin of the membrane was not even scratched. Was he here for a gala? The seniors of the sun spirit looked at the young enchanters in high spirits and felt sour in their hearts. F***ck you little brats, we are almost done with our research. Are you here to pick the peaches? If one really entered the great membrane of heaven and earth, without the care of experienced elders, even a half-immortal would be useless. Did he really think that just because he had the word immortal in his name, he would be tainted with immortal aura? This was incongruity within the scope of reason and human nature. It was the jealousy of the previous generation towards the next generation, and also the subversion of the previous generation towards the next generation. The world of cultivation moved forward because of this. This was the law of history. There were also those who had found large groups, such as the marching monks in the main world's Buddhist sects, the sparrow steps in the main world's heaven's choice, and the anchor chain floating anchor. They had hidden themselves quite deeply. They had finally met their family. It was only at this moment that everyone's understanding was finally completely unified. The breaking of the Hung River was inevitable, and no one could stop it. With Taoist Pang taking the lead, he introduced the research of these old guys to the young half-immortals without reservation. It would take some time for the half-immortal monsters to verify it themselves. There were no small fries here. They were all people who could carry the tripod of a realm. They were people who could make a realm tremble with a stomp of their feet. No one would listen to a biased person. They would only believe in their own judgment, because no one would joke about their own life. While everyone was familiarizing themselves with the environment, the people of the fifth ring gathered together. Qing Yangzi smiled. He was very gratified that the young people could walk together for thousands of years without separating. This kind of friendship was very precious. At least in the foreseeable future, the fifth ring would benefit from this, and the three pure ones would also benefit. Good, good, good. It's good that you're alive. Young people are too impulsive. They don't care about themselves. Let me tell you, during this period of time, it's not like no one has gone in. 2 human sun spirits and 1 sun spirit beast prepared all kinds of methods. We were still outside setting up a formation to support them, but a moment later, they met with an accident. It was a time to search for the past and the future. The dozens of support formations and message transmission formations that we set up outside are all useless. Only the soul lamp formation flickered 10 times before stopping. It can be seen that the defenses of the Hung River are far stronger than we imagined. Guandu continued, but even so, we can still get some inspiration from it. With the size of the Hung River realm, it's impossible to take care of all aspects of the Great Barrier of heaven and earth. It's even more impossible to encounter a fatal attack as soon as you enter, and rely on rebirth to stall for time. Their great cultivators aren't dense to this extent. Therefore, our judgment is that the battlefield isn't in the Great Barrier of heaven and earth, but in the painting of the Hung River. In other words, entering the Great Barrier is entering the Hung River. They have completely merged the two into one. In the Hung River, they are blessed by the heavens and can instantly surround it. Qing Yangzi continued, even the Hung River has a head and a tail. The 3 of them entered at the same time. With the magic items and treasures they brought, they could fight against at least a dozen sun spirits at the same time without being defeated. But the first time they were killed by the number of breaths. What does this mean? It means that the density of Hung River cultivators is very terrifying. It's not just the grand ritual of Yang spirit, but also their primordial spirit, Yin spirit, and even Yuanying. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to form such a terrifying attack. Combined with the specific situation of the Hung River, we judge that they didn't layer up their defenses, but concentrated all their strength on the great barrier of heaven and earth to fight directly, staking everything on one throw. They're very open. I have to say that there are experts in the Han River realm. They're using their lives to exchange with us. They can afford it, but can we? Won't the alliance collapse? Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian looked at each other, also having a headache. To fight in the great barrier of heaven and earth, that is, in the Hung River, they have the geographical advantage. Don't underestimate this. It has great significance for the mobilization and organization of people. They can always control the overall situation and put in power where it's most needed to solve problems. The invaders need to observe, judge, transmit information, and cooperate with each other. By the time they run to the place, it'll be too late. In other words, they would be able to accurately fight the enemy with numbers, the strong against the weak, and encircle the enemy to attack reinforcements. Countless tactical combinations could be realized. The significance of this in a war of cultivators was no less than that of a powerful army. At the very least, in terms of geographical advantage, the people of Hung River are invulnerable. Chapter 1866. Even if they didn't have the geographical advantage, they might not have the people either. Although the alliance was the alliance of the main world, they were in other people's territory. They worked together to protect their homeland, so it was hard to say which side this person was on. Only the right time was on the alliance's side, but it didn't have any practical significance. The alliance should have countless ways of doing things. Is there any suitable one? Qing Xian asked. Qing Yangzi shook his head. Little Xuanzi, don't always think about the sex property, this is not a good habit. This is the coffin bottom of us old guys' coffins. And, actually we've used it before, but the divinity in the eternal river is of a very high standard, all the ways of doing things can't penetrate it. Is there nothing we can do about it? Lu Xiaoyi was very doubtful. You really tried it? You're not a miser? Qing Yangzi flew into a rage. What's going on? You two fellows only want to reap without sowing, so you're eyeing the coffin bottom of the old man? Are there still rules? I really tried it, I know what you mean. The three pure ones all have some top-notch ways of doing things. It's not that they're reluctant, but that they're useless. They can't activate the great membrane of heaven and earth. That divinity is very strange, it's immune to all similar methods. Lu Xiaoyi was a little whimsical. Is there such a strange object, maybe a divine beast or a treasured gourd, that can suck in the eternal river just by opening its mouth? Guan Du sent a slap over, I'll beat you up, you lazy thing. If there's such a thing between heaven and earth, don't suck in the eternal river, just suck in the universe directly. You don't even need to practice swordsmanship, just hang a treasured gourd, and you can dominate the cultivation world. Did you read too many novels that it didn't enter your brain, but it entered your small intestine and turned into shit? Lu Xiaoyi had read a lot of biographies and novels, but not in this world. He had been harmed at some point in his previous life. There was no choice, it was also a characteristic of the era. The others were all frowning, but he was the only one who was talking without thinking. Is there any extraordinary spiritual treasure, whether it's innate or acquired, like the tree that the crow ancestor used to break the square pot, poking the whole family to the end? Let's hide in the tree hole and crawl in. This time, even Qing Yangzi wanted to slap him. How can a square pot be compared to the Heng River? There were only 2 Yang gods, and there was no need for a big tree. The people of any of the realms here could just rush up. There was no need for a big tree. That's all because of your unreliable crow ancestor. I heard that they're all wearing the same uniform, just like a bunch of nouveau riche. Guan Du couldn't take it anymore. What are you talking about? What was a nouveau riche? His clothes were golden yellow, and he was in high spirits. When the tree was planted, the heaven's might was unpredictable. If you don't understand, then don't spout nonsense. It's not embarrassing. Don't you know the way of battle? However, little E, The reason why the big tree can move the square pot is mainly because the square pot's grand membrane of heaven and earth is weak. It can't be moved here. These are two different concepts. Can you stop spouting nonsense? You've lost all my face. Lu Xiaoyi was very thick-skinned. He would never shut up just because he showed his cowardice. They were all elders of the family, so what was there to be embarrassed about? Is there a medium that ignites upon contact with water? No, it ignites upon contact with spiritual power. The long scroll of the eternal river is not a real river. It's just something formed by the billions of souls of the eternal river. We can't absorb it, so we might as well burn it. Qing Xian really couldn't take it. This was not just a disgrace to Xianyuan and the 5 rings, but also to interior Jingtian. Little E, stop talking. Your method, this method. It seems to make some sense. Qing Yangzi, Guandu, Qing Xian, and the dozens of Yang gods next to him were all lost in thought. It really did make sense. They only lacked such a hole in their brain. Now that they had a hole in their brain, countless vicious thoughts immediately came to their minds. Qing Xian's brain was the fastest. If we go in together, we won't fight first, but set fire together. There are many deviant fires that can burn spiritual power, especially the Netherworld Phosphorus Fire, the Netherworld Ghost Fire, and the True Sun Fire. Let's use them together and burn the long scroll of the Eternal River first. Let's not talk about whether we can shake it or not. At the very least, once the flames are ignited, the various borrowings of the Eternal River will be greatly reduced. We may not be able to take advantage of it, but at least we won't be at a disadvantage. Qing Yangzi was also full of evil ideas. Let's focus on burning it first. See if we can burn a hole in it and set up a formation of fire seeds outside so that we can have an endless supply. Then we'll have a way out in case of emergency. Another 3 pure Yang god also chimed in, spiritual power can't be stimulated the most. Especially when there are billions of people. How can we control them all? I have the art of illusion and the theory of countless grains of sand. As long as we find the heart of the people of Hengi, where their obsession is, we can tease it a little and they'll immediately go crazy. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the 3 pure Yang elders with disdain and said, "What kind of people are you? I'm ashamed to be associated with you." Overall, this was not the safest way. If they really had a way to deal with the long scroll of the Eternal River, they wouldn't have taken such a risk. After all, they wouldn't have an advantage after setting it on fire. They would only be able to call it even in terms of geographical advantage. They would still have to face an unavoidable problem. If others exchanged lives with you, what would you do? But it was still a method that wasn't really a method. They still needed to carefully study how to make the fire the biggest. How to spread it the fastest. If one fire didn't work, how to burn 2 or 3 fires. How to invest people. There were countless questions like whether they needed to leave people outside. They all needed to work together and get everyone's approval. Everyone would participate in the discussion and put forward their own opinions, worries, and suggestions. Finally, they would consider it comprehensively. In fact, there were several similar methods. For example, there were half-immoral freaks who proposed using water to flush it, using poison to fight poison. They used water from other places to dilute the soul of the Eternal River. There were also drainage methods, mountain blocking methods, spirit swallowing methods, and all kinds of strange methods. In terms of imagination, these young freaks' ideas were obviously stronger than the Sun God Seniors. This was because they had been walking different paths all their lives. Lu Xiaoyi only gave suggestions and didn't care about the actual implementation. For such a large-scale conspiracy, there were naturally the best Dharma cultivators and monks to consider. They were also the best at this. The Black Dragon leader sighed, "Little E, you're really wicked. You're not only burning the reliance of the Heng River cultivators, you're also burning the thoughts of countless Heng River mortals. When they reincarnate, I'm afraid they won't be real people of Heng River anymore." Lu Xiaoyi smiled. "I'm just saying. They thought of the method, it has nothing to do with me. Besides, isn't it good to burn it? If they really reincarnate and still can't forget the Hung River orthodoxy, who do you think will tolerate it? Cutting the weeds and pulling up the roots is the iron law of the cultivation world. No one wants them to develop again and take revenge on the original instigators. Therefore, there will be waves after waves of harvesting leaks, and the Hung River realm will forever be in chaos. Cut off the thoughts and everyone will stop. It might not be a bad thing for ordinary people. Chapter 1867. The Alliance dawdled for a few more months outside Hangi Heavens. During this period, there were countless tests. Finally, they formed a plan that everyone agreed with. What was different from what they imagined was that there was no talk and laughter here. Everyone was very cautious because they didn't want to lose their lives here. They needed everyone's approval. Today was the day of the attack. However, from the outside, it didn't seem any different from usual. Everyone still gathered and went their separate ways. Those who were drinking tea drank tea, those who were chatting chatted. There was no general assembly and no murderous intent. There must be a way to peek outside from the inside of the grand membrane. For the first wave of attack, even a few breaths of time was precious. Qing Yangzi, Guandu, Taoist Pang, White Brows, and Broken Silkhorn were still poking around in front of the grand membrane as usual. It was no different from the past few months. They looked like they were studying to their heart's content. As they discussed, they mentioned something interesting and laughed out loud. Divine sensed shock. Amidst the laughter, a few old foxes leaped and entered the grand membrane. At the same time, among the 300 to 400 cultivators who were drinking tea, chatting, drinking, meditating, and strolling, nearly 300 of them flashed and entered the grand membrane. Among them, there were interior half-immortals, 5 rings, heaven's choice, Buddhists, and demonic beasts. Shou Xian, anchor chain, floating sink, and light. This was a strategy that had been decided long ago. The attack was divided into 2 levels. Actually, on a large scale, it was just 1 level. However, the less than 100 people would set up a fire seed array outside the grand membrane. Once a hole was poked inside, they would immediately pour fire in and be ready to go in and support any time. When the battle began, everyone understood their own responsibilities. Perhaps they came here for different purposes and had different moods. Some were willing, some were forced, and some didn't care. However, once the battle began, everyone would go all out. Because if they hesitated now, they would be letting down their own lives. The Hangi realm chose to fight, and so did the Alliance. This was a psychological suppression. If they didn't have the confidence, how could they talk about destroying the realm? The hesitation and dilly-dallying in the beginning was just to understand more. Now, they were going all out. Going all out was the right way to go. At this time, the use of tactics was limited. Crushing them with strength was the only way to win. As soon as Lu Xiaoyi crashed into the heaven and earth grand membrane, he immediately felt the world spinning. When he focused again, the water around him rippled and shimmered. You could think of this as a river, but that was only in theory. A more realistic description would be an incomparably wide belt of glowing light. Those glowing lights were not fireflies, but the light of countless souls that had passed away over millions of years in the Hung River. He had already experienced this feeling many times. From the first time he saw the Eternal River scroll and the Beast territory, to the battles with the various cultivators of the Hung River, he was incomparably familiar with the environment here. Even the souls here seemed familiar. The Eternal River scroll that all the cultivators of the Hung River used was actually the same thing. It came from the Mother Scroll. It didn't belong to him alone, but to the entire Hung River. Therefore, these souls were still the same souls. There was no difference. This included the countless souls that listened to Lu Xiaoyi's stories about Ning Yozhong. Dearest, your young master is back. Lu Xiaoyi laughed heartily. The Sword River flowed backwards, cutting the Yuanying gods that came from all directions into pieces. These low-level cultivators were nothing more than human heads to him now. They weren't worth mentioning. The 300 Yang gods didn't appear in a group. In fact, the alliance never thought of grouping up. Their goal was to set fire everywhere. Therefore, the moment they entered, those who were strong in battle but not good at setting fire, such as the swordsman, body cultivator, demonic beasts and demigods, were used to kill people in an instant. They didn't want to kill the Yang gods, only the Yuanying gods or Yuanying primordial spirits. Their goal was clear. They wanted to attract hatred at the first opportunity. They wanted the person in charge of the eternal river to feel threatened by them. Attracting hatred in such an environment wasn't a good idea. However, if there were hundreds of such cultivators attracting hatred at the same time, it would cause the person in charge to be flustered and lose sight of the others. Almost 300 intruders had to be taken care of, right? Especially those powerful cultivators who wanted to kill people in an instant. The person in charge could clearly sense which threats were the biggest through the Eternal River scroll, but he couldn't tell who the threat was. What orthodoxy! He could only act according to his intuition and distribute his strength to the most critical place, where the casualties were the greatest. In this way, the Yang gods of each alliance wouldn't have too many opponents. People like Lu Xiaoyi, who were the focus of attention, might be surrounded by more people, and those who hadn't killed people yet would be fewer. The threat was small. In a battlefield that was calculated by breaths, under such a rapidly changing situation, even someone as wise as Amir Khan couldn't make an accurate judgment in the first place. After entering the Eternal River scroll for 3 breaths, the hundreds of cultivators responsible for attracting hatred were surrounded by at least 100 opponents. The pressure increased, and some unlucky Yang gods were simply killed and reborn. It could be seen that the people of Hengi River were willing to risk their lives. At this moment, the nearly 200 Yang gods of the Alliance, who hadn't shown any particular threat after entering, suddenly moved. They moved in unison. They chose the most insidious phosphorus fire of the netherworld. Phosphorescence, in terms of the power of fire, was not ranked in the top of the deviant flames, but it had a characteristic that made people abnormally fearful, and that was that once it was ignited, it was very difficult to extinguish. There was no end to it. A single person setting fire was insignificant in the huge eternal river, but hundreds of Yang gods setting fire together immediately had the power to create a large area. The most vicious thing was that these 200 arsonists all opened their storage rings and poured out all kinds of things to start the fire. Phosphorus powder, phosphatide, fire essence. During the battle, they only used 2 kinds of magic, fire magic and wind magic. A Zhuji stage cultivator's fire magic was only a foot long. When it came to Jin Dan, they could set fire and collapse houses. When it came to Yuanying, they could form fire clouds in the sky. When it came to Supreme, they could set fire to the sky. But there were 200 Yang gods here, 200 magic fools who were most proficient in fire. While flying around, they were actually flying to places where there was no fire, and burning randomly. While sprinkling phosphorus powder, they were blowing wind. Hundreds of tens of thousands of fire domains continued to spread, and soon, they connected into one, increasing the intensity of the fire and spreading even faster. The phosphorus fire was easy to burn but difficult to extinguish. For the Yang gods of Hung River, they might be able to suppress the fire, but if they suppressed the fire, they wouldn't be able to kill people, which was also a dilemma. As for the other low-level cultivators, they were somewhat powerless against the fire set by the Yang gods. In the end, those who put out the fire couldn't catch up with those who set the fire. After a few breaths, the fire in the Eternal River could no longer be stopped. In time, the entire holy river would turn into a river of fire. This was the inevitable result. In just a dozen breaths, the Eternal River was in chaos. Chapter 1868. Amir Khan's face was ashen. What he was afraid of still came true. After dawdling outside for several months, the Alliance still accurately found the weakness of the long scroll of the Eternal River. There is no perfect defense in this world. When you enclose yourself in a cage where you cannot move freely, you are destined to be trampled on. The greatest weakness of the Hung River boundary is that the orthodoxies rely too much on the environment. This makes them lose the space to move freely. Where to go? There is only one Hung River. It is unrealistic to hope that the invaders will never be able to find a countermeasure. They are all Yang spirit cultivators. There is nothing you can think of that I can't think of. He only hopes that this time will come later, after the Alliance cultivators suffer heavy casualties. But the opponent's eyes are very sharp. As soon as the battle starts, they immediately set fire to the Hung River, reducing the geographical threat of the Hung River to the lowest. Of course, it is not a comeback. The fire will affect the Hung River cultivators who use the power of the Hung River, and it is the same for these invaders. Fire does not have eyes. Does it know who to burn and who not to burn? In other words, the difference in the utilization of the environment between the two sides is minimized. In the end, the solution still depends on the hard power of both sides. Quantity versus quality. What kind of threat will the phosphorescence cause to the Hung River? It is not as simple as imagined. It can burn these souls away. Souls cannot be solved by burning or drowning. The most effective way is to devour the soul and transform it into power. In view of the innumerable souls in the Hung River, it is actually very difficult to do this. The meaning of burning is not to destroy, but to incite. When the temperature of these innumerable souls in the fire increases, their originally calm state is forcibly dragged into a state of excitement. In this state, even the Hung River cultivators are unable to order them around and borrow their power. What are the souls thinking in this state? It is not how to listen to other people's orders, but how to pursue one's own obsession. What is the obsession of ordinary people? To be able to live without worries, to have their own house, to marry a beautiful wife, to stand out and so on. But to most ordinary people in the Hung River boundary, there is only one thing: to reincarnate into a higher caste in their next life. These are not revealed yet. Right now, the Eternal River of Souls was only drifting further and further away in its frenzy. It was still some distance away from completely losing control. This was what both sides were fighting for. The people of Hengi River wanted to deal a heavy blow to the invaders during this period of time, while the cultivators of the Alliance wanted to drag things out as long as possible so that the fire would burn even more fiercely, until the entire Eternal River was ablaze. This kind of burning affected the people of Hengi River. They could no longer precisely mobilize the cultivators to kill the invaders. Most of the time, they just went wherever they encountered the invaders. Some of them were unlucky and had hundreds of enemies behind them. Some of them were relaxed and had very few opponents around them. 30 breaths after the fire started, the 100 or so cultivators outside did not see any traces of Shua Shua. They knew that it was unrealistic to expect the Eternal River to be connected to the outside world. According to the plan, they all crashed into the Heaven and Earth Grand Membrane and joined the battle. At this point, all the forces of the Alliance had been invested. Only the true monarchs and great demons of the demon territories were left to monitor the situation. This was also a dispensable task. There was also a Yang god from each realm to watch over them. This was a situation that had long been expected. They were just waiting for a chance to see if a few cultivators who were especially proficient in fire spells could Shua Shua Shua. It would be a surprise if they could do it, but it would not be strange if they could not. Everyone would just charge in together. In a battle of strength, there was no room for you to stay in the reserve team. The Yang god cultivators would not be exhausted in a short period of time. The battle was very fierce. However, it was different from the previous 3 Yang gods who died. Because the power of Hengi River was greatly diluted, on average, each Yang god of the Alliance had no more than 100 opponents. Many of them were primordial spirits and even gods of lower realms surrounding them. For the powerful cultivators, it was not difficult to deal with this. Of course, there was no average. There were only lucky and unlucky ones. The cultivators of the alliance also gradually gathered as they moved. However, at the beginning of the battle, there were no large groups. More of them were in groups of 2 or 3, 5 or 6. Under the secret command of Amir Khan, hundreds of young god primordial spirits and yin gods gathered at the source of Hengi River. They were preparing to activate the ice and snow phenomenon of the lice goddess. In the Hengi River system, there was no special ice and snow god. However, as one of the main gods, lice goddess cultivated in the snowy mountains. Therefore, she had powerful ice and snow divine power. However, she rarely used it, and it was not very useful in battle. Amir Khan also had a plan for the alliance to set fire. He knew very well that if they lost the use of Hengi River, it would be difficult for them to exchange quantity for quality in battle. For this reason, they were preparing to activate Lice Goddess's ice and snow phenomenon at the source of Hengi River. With the help of the river's characteristics, they could push all the way down from the source and completely extinguish the ubiquitous phosphorus fire. It took time to mobilize manpower. It was also because of this mobilization that the invaders felt limited pressure. War was a process of constantly weighing the pros and cons. Focus on the most important contradiction and then talk about the rest. The water of Hengi River flowed down from the Great Snow Mountain and spiraled for hundreds of thousands of miles before returning to the sea. The entire river had a powerful internal force that flowed from the mountain to the sea. This was a miracle of nature that humans could not interfere with. Although the scroll of the Eternal River was just a soul clone of the Eternal River, the power within still existed. Countless souls were also born from the snowy mountain, and then meandered down until they merged into the void. From the void, they reflected on the snowy mountain, and the souls reappeared, and the cycle repeated again and again, and reincarnated. The miraculous process of the souls reappearing from nothingness to the Great Snow Mountain contained the secret of reincarnation in Hengi River. Those that were reflected back to the Great Snow Mountain could only continue their journey to the Hengi River. Those that were not reflected back to the Great Snow Mountain could only reincarnate. For example, if there were 10,000 souls that entered the void and only 9,000 souls were reflected from the Snow Mountain, it meant that there were 1,000 souls that were reincarnated and started the journey to the next world. Of course, during this process, the Eternal River flowed and countless souls of the people in the present world died and entered the river. No one could reverse the rotation of the Hengi River. Not even immortals. Therefore, the ice and snow from the source of the Great Snow Mountain did not need to be fanned everywhere like a fire. Following the flow of the river, it would naturally engulf the entire region. As long as the ice and snow passed, the countless souls of the Hengi River would naturally return to normal and listen to orders. Amir Khan would be able to sense the entire region of the Great Snow Mountain. He would be able to focus on every detail. He would be able to determine which areas to strengthen and which areas to maintain. He would be able to control the overall situation and undoubtedly be able to maximize the advantage of numbers. Unlike now, they were practically blinded by the fire. Apart from the small area around them, they couldn't sense anything further. This caused many of the Hung River sect cultivators to be in a state of emptiness. They either couldn't find an opponent, had too many troops, or were in a pinch because they had too few people. This was the key to turning the situation around. Chapter 1869. Lu Xiaoyi was one of those unlucky people. There were close to 200 people following behind him, each of them in their respective states. Since the gods of Hengi River system were particularly fond of having 4 arms, when they opened their arms to surround him, it was like a black sea of arms. F***CK, are they giving me a thumbs up? Among them were 2 young spirit high priests. He didn't know if it was really a coincidence, or if they saw that he was too dangerous as a swordsman and took special care of him. His fighting style was very easy to focus on because he killed people too quickly. But he didn't want to tangle with the 2 young spirits. At this moment, in this situation, it was not suitable. The most important thing now was how to eliminate the enemy's living forces, especially the perfected lords. He had been waiting for a chance to meet his attacks head-on. Before this, in view of his terrible reputation, almost everyone who fought with him chose strange methods to annoy him to no end. Only here, the Hangi River cultivators held the idea of exchanging quantity for quality. They didn't care about death, they just wanted to kill him in the Eternal River in the shortest time possible. Boost morale. He liked people with guts. Millions of sword lights rolled up, colliding with the Hangi River Death Warriors who were advancing dauntlessly. He didn't dodge in the slightest. But this lack of dodging was only in the eyes of the perfected Lord Yuanying. In fact, he was still deliberately avoiding the two Yang spirits. It wasn't that he couldn't kill the Yang spirits, it was just that it was a little troublesome. He had to clean up these rotten fish first. These people might not be strong, but in the long scroll of the Eternal River, they had the advantage of numbers and could provide a certain degree of vision for the host. When his card escape technique was fully unleashed, there were very few people who could catch up to him, and they were all coincidentally bumped into him. Blood rained down, disappearing along the way. It was a spectacular sight. Lu Xiaoyi also didn't seek the cooperation of his allies. He was used to being a lone ranger, and it was hard for him to accept the so-called cooperation. And who could cooperate with him? If they couldn't keep up with him, how could they help each other? It was safer to come alone. At least he didn't have to worry about others. It was a mess. The man, the sword light, and the countless arms were mixed together. After a few rounds, dozens of people from Hangi River tribe fell under the sword. They couldn't even catch a single trace of the man. They could only passively run behind him. As he ran, he disappeared. This can't go on. This swordsman was extremely cunning, and unpredictable. Numbers meant nothing to him, and it would only add to the unnecessary casualties. Tell them to disperse. Only the two of us will surround him. One of the grand priests of Hung River saw through the situation and suggested. Thus, under the orders of the two Yang God Grand Priests, the cultivators of Hung River sect dispersed to find the next suitable target. This was the consequence of the burning of the Eternal River. They were unable to maximize the utilization of their military strength. They were hammered here and there in the middle of the Eternal River, delaying the most crucial initial period of time. This finally allowed the invaders to gain a foothold. But Lu Xiaoyi wouldn't compete with the two of them just because the surroundings were cleared. He wasn't that stupid. Of course, he would tail them all the way and stab them wherever there were more people. With more people, it was the best time to use the Flying Sword group. This made the two Yang gods of Hung River sect extremely depressed. Two people were already chasing a primordial spirit, how could they have the nerve to call a few more Yang gods over? This swordsman seemed to have an abnormal understanding of the Hung River system. Their traps, techniques, delaying methods, attack patterns, and so on were completely ineffective against him. The two of them finally realized that the best way was to ignore him and let him roam freely. Whoever caught him would be the one to blame. But their sense of responsibility towards the domain didn't allow them to do so. In this kind of awkwardness, Lu Xiaoyi was like a fish in water in the Eternal River. He only ate small fish and shrimps. This was actually the countermeasure that everyone in the Hong Outer Membrane Alliance had discussed. Don't be in a hurry to destroy the other party's Yang God Grand Ritual. First, deal with the small ones. Once these small ones were scared, they would think about the Grand Ritual. There was plenty of time. These people of Hung River were unwilling to leave their homeland. This was their fatal weakness. It meant that they had lost their strategic mobility, which was very important. But Lu Xiaoyi's free-for-all state didn't last long. Waves of fluctuations came from the source of the Eternal River. It was like a skier halfway up a mountain who felt the tremors under his feet and knew that an avalanche was about to come. Everyone felt it. Because they were all in the Eternal River, this abnormality couldn't escape the senses of the cultivators. The people of Hung River were delighted. Because they were looking forward to the Lice Ice statue sweeping away all evil flames. The cultivators of the Alliance were calm because they had long been prepared for this. What was the nemesis of fire? This was a principle that all Chi refinement cultivators understood. At their level, they knew even more. They knew that there were many existences in the world that could restrain fire, such as earth, wind, and even more advanced ones like taking drastic measures. The phosphorescent fire could exist in the eternal river because the environment here was within the atmosphere and there was sufficient oxygen. Enough for the fire to wreak havoc. The cultivators of Hung River were never worried about the river being set on fire when they fought in the void of the universe. Because there was no air, the river couldn't be burned. So this gave people a deep-rooted belief that the eternal river wasn't afraid of being burned. That was why hundreds of young gods hadn't thought of a fire attack, even though fire attacks were the most basic techniques in both the moral world and the cultivation world. Everyone naturally thought that fire attacks weren't feasible. But they neglected the fact that this time, the people of Hung River were setting up under the world's great membrane, within the atmosphere. So what was the best way to extinguish the fire? It was to turn the eternal river outside the world's great membrane. Once the air was cut off, it would naturally lose its effectiveness. But after careful research, the old young gods of the Alliance judged that the gains didn't make up for the losses. There were too many drawbacks to turning the eternal river outside the great membrane. First, the Alliance cultivators had a way to immediately leave. Whether to fight or stay depended on their intentions. Secondly, Hung River's intention to win would be destroyed. The eternal river was exposed to the void. Many young gods had too many ways to weaken it. It was absolutely not advisable. After thinking about it, the most likely way to extinguish the fire was to use ice and snow. As for the eternal river, ice and snow were the most convenient. So now, ice and snow flowed down the river. Everyone bathed in it felt a trace of coldness. Even the cultivators, whose bodies were impervious to fire and water, felt a trace of comfort after being roasted by fire for a long time. It was like rain falling from the sky. But the Alliance cultivators didn't want to see such a change. So, the Alliance young god closest to the source greedily breathed in the coldness that swept through his body. He had already prepared a forbidden technique and an ice-type Taoist treasure. Ice sealing heaven and earth. He didn't try to stop the brilliant momentum of the ice and snow statue, but added fuel to the fire. Isn't it snowing? Okay, I'll give you a hand. Let's just freeze. This wasn't ordinary ice and snow, but the extremely cold ice of the cultivation world. It was the opposite of fire. It was enough to make countless soul bodies in the eternal river suffer. Chapter 1870. It wasn't just one Alliance cultivator doing this, but almost all of the Alliance's young gods. Apart from a certain spell genius, even Guandu had a rather impressive frost sword technique. As the people of Hengi River wished, their ice and snow facade baptism was very successful. It was so successful that not only was the phosphorus fire extinguished, but the eternal river was completely frozen. It wasn't 0 degrees that mortals could bear, but minus 100 degrees. Thanks to the Alliance's young gods, they helped the ice and snow facade complete an unprecedented century of ice. The ice and snow were still being transmitted, but now it wasn't cold, but bitter cold. By now, it was obvious what the people of the Alliance wanted to do. I make a fire and you make it snow? Sure, I'll help you freeze it to death. I freeze it and you use the ice and snow facade to burn it. Sure, I'll help you burn it. Use phosphorus fire, true fire, and heavenly fire. We'll support whatever the people of Hengi River want to do. And we'll carry it forward and work harder, fully playing the role of a disaster magnifier. What was the purpose? Even an idiot would know what would happen when the souls of ordinary people changed back and forth in such extreme temperatures. This was the result of thinking. This was the meaning of dawdling. These young god cultivators brought the way of nature to the extreme. This was the power of knowledge, far more ferocious than shouting and killing. The ice and snow facade originated from the source of the snow mountain, but Amir Khan's position was at the estuary. It wasn't that he was avoiding danger, but only here could he know the situation of the entire eternal river like the back of his hand. The long scroll of the eternal river was made up of souls, flowing in the direction of the estuary, so the information brought by these souls could give him enough information to judge the entire situation. He was disappointed again, because now the eternal river was completely frozen, and there was no orderly flow. How could he judge the situation? Not to mention giving orders. Continue to let the Hangi River cultivators at the source of the ice and snow facade? It was almost certain that the invaders would add fuel to the fire. This was an endless cycle. No matter what the outcome was, it was useless to the people of Hangi River. He sighed deeply and said sadly to the young god priests around him, "I've done my best. I still can't stop them from coming in, this is my fault. I thought I could rely on my own wisdom to keep the enemy at bay, but now I realize that I'm a frog at the bottom of a well. I don't understand the wonders of the outside world at all. The profoundness of other orthodoxies. In front of them, our so-called wisdom is somewhat pitiful. Relying on a holy river, relying on divinity from the heavens, we will never amount to anything." Salman Khan slowly shook his head. "No, you have already done it. In this attack on the eternal river, we have seen our own shortcomings, and we have also seen the strength of mainstream orthodoxies. It was our previous actions that dragged down the entire domain. The ones who should apologize are us so-called radicals, not you. But I don't think now is the time to find out who's responsible, nor is it the time to discuss who should take responsibility. What we should figure out now is what we should do. If it's still the absolute death guard, then we should go and fight, not stay here and talk." At the end of the day, it was the grand ceremony that finally understood the consequences of going against the mainstream orthodoxies. Unfortunately, even in the cultivation world where gods and Buddhas were everywhere, there was no medicine for regret. Amir Khan raised his head and his eyes became firm. Obviously, he had made a decision. "Are you still willing to believe me now?" The few grand ceremonies nodded silently. "You have never been wrong. Defending the domain is not the fault of fighting. Without enough strength, doing anything is useless. We are willing to listen to you, but I hope it's not too late." Amir Khan took a deep breath. "My intention is to flip the eternal river out of the heaven and earth membrane. Directly enter the void and freely engage in battle, then there will not be the crisis of ice and fire." Salman Khan frowned. "In this case, the eternal river will not be a problem, but we will not be able to trap them. Once we return to the void, the initiative of the battle will be in their hands. And because of this compromise, our morale will plummet. If we want to fight to the death like this again, I'm afraid it will be very difficult to do so. Have you thought that if we do this, we might not even be able to drag a few people down with us?" Amir Khan was still firm. "No, you don't understand what I mean. What I mean is to flip the heaven and earth membrane, give up on the eternal river and freely engage in battle with the invaders in the void." He stared at everyone with a sharp gaze and said word by word, "Give up on the eternal river because we cannot be so selfish and use the trillions of souls in the eternal river as a medium for battle. If this continues, countless people will never be able to reincarnate. They need to rest and recuperate. The meaning of fighting in the void is that you can fight or leave." The few Grand Khans were stunned. Was he admitting defeat? Was he preparing to escape? If he knew this would happen, why did he do it in the first place? Amir Khan's eyes were filled with pain. "I admit that my defense plan was only in shape because I did not know the enemy well. This is my fault. If I knew this would happen, I would have organized the teams to retreat separately. The enemy has limited manpower, and the universe is so big. There will definitely be some who can escape. But not changing is the biggest mistake of all. Now, I finally understand the difference. If I still order everyone to defend to the death, I will forever be the sinner of Hung River. Run out. Run as many as you can. Forget about Hung River system. Forget about hatred. Until one day, even without the eternal river, even if we are not in Hung River boundary, our orthodoxy can still exist and be strong. That will be the day we return. The few Grand Khans were deep in thought. There was a deep philosophy behind these words. That's right, an orthodoxy that couldn't leave the realm and couldn't exist independently, an orthodoxy that couldn't survive outside the realm, could only be called powerful and vain. Only by walking out and training themselves in the universe would they not be trapped by the enemy's encirclement and wait for death. Amir Khan laughed. I believe that the great Hung River system will still have a place in the universe. I believe that the resilient people of Hung River can still create miracles even if they leave Hung River. Let's do it like this. Don't bring the low and middle level cultivators. It is a waste of effort. If these tens of thousands of people charge out, not only will they break the shackles of the main world alliance, but they will also break the shackles of their own hearts. We should have done this long ago. But we just could not make up our minds. Now is the perfect opportunity. There are unavoidable conditions and unforgettable memories. These things can support us to walk more resolutely and walk further. As for who stays and who leaves, it is all up to you. I am old, so I will stay here and stall the enemy for you. Dying in battle requires courage, but enduring humiliation requires more responsibility. I will choose the easier option. Those who are too tired, you guys can do it. Salman Khan took a step forward. I am older than you. We have fought for our entire lives. Let us fight together for the last time. Chapter 1871. Lu Xiaoyi was still in the middle of his hunting game. The two Hung River Yang gods had long disappeared, which made his hunting much easier. In fact, he was not the only one who felt this way. A similar feeling existed in the hearts of every Alliance Yang god. This should not be the case, because this should be the best time for the people of Hung River to exchange their lives. The longer it dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for them, and their morale would not always be high. Even cultivators could not always be in a state of excitement and fighting for their lives. Even taking drugs was useless, because their resistance to drugs was too strong. 300 to 400 half-immoral Yang gods of the Alliance were recklessly harvesting lives in the Hung River. Their targets and realms were the opposite. First, they killed Yuanying, then Yin gods, primordial spirits. They disdained the Yang god grand sacrifice. Here, they were all enemies. There was no such thing as equal realms in war. If they really cared about this, these Yuanying should not have come. What the Hung River Yang gods were doing was to do their best to entangle these invaders, but the huge difference in numbers still allowed more than 200 Yang gods to get away with it. There were no cultivators of the same realm to target them, which gave them unlimited space. They were not swordsmen. They did not have strict discipline, nor did they have a mature cooperation system. The most important thing was that they did not have the ability to challenge those of a higher realm. This made the primordial spirit and Yin gods feel very tired when dealing with the Yang god invaders. In short, they did not have a firm combat goal. Once they set their sights on it, they would never change. Strength was not the same as combat effectiveness. It also required actual combat practice and a long period of self-confidence. In this regard, they were too far away from the 5-ring level, not to mention the sword vein. The advantage of hiding behind the scenes and scheming was that they would not get burned, but the consequences were that they were strong on paper. The plan was very good, but once they got serious, they would show their cowardice. Of course, this was under the calculations of countless old foxes in the Alliance. It was not that they were too weak, but that their opponents were too strong. The blue sky sword vein could achieve their goals if they were determined to kill. This was because they had experience, trade-offs, confidence, a system, and a unique temperament formed over tens of thousands of years. They knew very well how to achieve their goals. He couldn't do the same. In the unpredictable battlefield, they only appeared to be very ruthless, while the enemy's bones were filled with viciousness. Amir Khan's decision was spread among the cultivators of Hung River. Through the Eternal River Scroll, which was not very clever, although it could not be done in real time under normal circumstances, it was still passed down. To Amir Khan and Salman Khan, their elegy did not have any good effect. Instead, it caused chaos among the Hung River cultivators. To spread such news in the middle of a war, one had to be extremely careful. One careless mistake and the morale of the army would collapse. Touching words also had to be adapted to the environment. It wasn't appropriate in a war. War required blood. He needed encouragement. Even lies were needed. If it was Qing Yangzi who was in charge of such a retreat, he definitely wouldn't mention something like "you guys go first and I'll cover for you guys." He would only say that there were strong reinforcements coming from the outside. "We'll fight our way out and coordinate from the inside." When the reinforcements were nowhere to be seen, he would change his words: "Let's fight poison with poison. Let's go to the nearest Fuchen's nest." All of these were actually running away. But you couldn't admit that this was the psychology of war. No one could teach you this, and no ancient books could teach you this. You could only learn it yourself in the war. Of course, the sword vein did not need to do this, so they had fewer people. When the tens of thousands of Hung River cultivators had two thoughts, the pressure on the alliance was even lighter. There would always be those who cherished their lives, there would always be those who valued their own path of cultivation, and there were many of them. Without the iron and blood token, those who retreated would be killed. How many people could you expect to be willing to die? Amir Khan and Salman Khan felt that they were old and had lived enough, but there were many people here who had not lived enough. Even the commander admitted defeat and placed his hopes on the distant and unknown future. What would the cultivators below think? Amir Khan had an outstanding personality, great strength, and enough long-term strategic vision, but this did not mean that he was a competent commander on the battlefield. No one was omniscient, and omnipotent. Reading the art of war would never make a commander. This position needed experience. You needed to fight, even if you failed. Then you needed to accumulate in blood and fire. Hung River lacked this. They were good at camouflage and concealment. They had hidden for tens of thousands of years and had never experienced a large-scale war. How could the cultivators' data on paper represent their true strength? This was the reason why the old foxes of the Alliance had resolutely invested all their forces. Because they knew that even if there was no chance at the beginning, an opportunity would appear as they fought. The unpredictable battlefield would cause the opponents who had not experienced war for tens of thousands of years to misjudge. This was almost inevitable. As long as they could survive the initial period. So they waited for a few months to let the people of Hung River think that they were at their wits' end and were forced to act rashly. The 3 young spirits who went in and were killed were also part of the psychological inducement. Of course, there were always such unlucky people who couldn't see the evil intentions of the old foxes and were hot-blooded. In the end, as long as they were not particularly close to them, they were allowed to go in. Waiting was not doing nothing. It was also a smart strategy. In the end, the young man from Hengi Boundary who could not see the situation clearly came. He waited for the young man from Interior Realm to come. He waited for a conspiracy that had been planned for a long time. Victory could also be obtained through waiting. Believe it or not, these old foxes used living facts to teach everyone a lesson, not only the people of Hung River, but also the young half-immortals. Feeling that something was not right, Lu Shaoyi finally found Qing Yangzi in the long scroll of the Eternal River. The old man was dawdling with a Hung River Yang spirit. Lu Shaoyi did not say anything and went up to attack fiercely, slashing the Yang spirit several times. The Yang spirit knew that something was wrong and immediately fled. This was a good choice because he could still help if he went to other places to find other opponents. If he persisted here, he might not be able to survive the next slash. Qing Yangzi chuckled. Little E, you're too rash. You can still play. Friendship first, life and death second. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Old man, I don't believe you can't see that they haven't shown their strength at all. I don't know what happened, but I'm afraid there will be changes next. Qing Yangzi smiled. Where else can they change? They are just running away. Lu Xiaoyi's heart skipped a beat. These old foxes even hid it from him. Old man, you have arrangements outside? Qing Yangzi said slowly, there isn't much of a setup. Just 37 Changshu and 28 Dao Zhao. I will release them one by one and let them go slowly. I want to see how many of them will be left in the end. Little E, when you go to the void, you young people should put in more effort. I am not as old as I used to be. This old waste. Looking at the old man's cunning smile, he knew that this was the old man's revenge for him and Qing Xian saying that the old man was stingy. This old man was really a good-for-nothing. Chapter 1872. Outside the fifth ring, in the space of 2 guan. The beasts worked together and were about to force the humans onto the planet. This was the beginning of the massacre. At this moment, a huge formation appeared on the planet behind the humans. It went from dark to bright and finally became dazzling. This was a formation that could only be activated by burning the planet's core. The energy consumption was extremely shocking, so it had a limited time. Just as this planet began to mutate, the other 3 planets also began to undergo the same changes. The 4 planets intersected and formed a huge irregular triangular cone space. The mutants were tightly trapped within the formation. It's the 4 elements creation and destruction formation. Oh no, we've been tricked. The winged people reacted the fastest, but no matter how fast they were, they couldn't be faster than the formation. Not to mention organizing their men to seize the space. Why does it look like a 2 guan? Bughead was still a little ignorant. The void beast was more sensitive to space. This space, we can't break out of the 4 walls. It seems like we can only leave from the 4 elements door. For example, the one in front. The winged people wanted to cry but had no tears. No matter how careful they were still tricked by these 2 idiots. Didn't the 2 of you say that victory was in front of us? What's going on now? Isn't it the other way around? It's not us who are surrounding them, it's them who are surrounding us. I've already advised you to leave, but you insist on seeking death here. Bughead shook his head. Seeking death? Brother Winged, which eye of yours can see the path to death? It's just a 4 elements formation. Let's put in all our effort and just charge out. What's there to panic about? As the saying goes, when the cart reaches the mountain, the mountain. The winged people were furious. When the cart reaches the mountain, there will be a path. When the boat reaches the bridge, it will naturally cross. If you don't know this, then don't say it. It's not shameful to be uncultured. What's shameful is pretending to be cultured when you're uncultured. Do you know why you've been tricked to this extent? It's because of your attitude of pretending to know when you don't. Bughead was unconvinced. I'm shameful. Why would I be shameful? I'm not even human. You dare to scold me? Scold me again? The void beast mediated. The two of you. There's no reason for internal strife at this time. If there's a problem, let's charge out first. Quickly think of a solution. Time waits for no one. The winged man suppressed his anger and swore to himself that if he ever cooperated with the swarm again, he would rather lose his wings forever. Brainless thing, what the hell? Even though he was annoyed, he still had to think of a solution. The 4 walls of the 4 elements life and death formation are all dead ends. They used the planet's core as their source, and that was not something that could be broken by ordinary forces. However, all array formations had a life gate. This array formation was hastily set up, but it would still have a life gate, and it was on the 4 planets. If we want to break out, there are only 2 paths. We can either break through the human formation in front of us, or we can go to the other 3 planets to take a look. I'm sure there will be human formations, but I don't know how many people there are. Is it strong or weak? Insect Head also suppressed its dissatisfaction. After all, it would be a lie to say that it was not panicking in the current situation. Even ants cherish their lives, let alone insects. The advantage of breaking through the current human defenses is that they will be exhausted after fighting for a long time. But I'm thinking, with the strength of a 5th ring, where would they find enough power to defend the other 3 exits? Insect Head's words made sense. The humans in front of them basically accounted for half of the 5th ring's strength, or even more. Even if the remaining 5 ring forces were to rush over and split between the 3 planets, how many of them could be deployed on each planet? This was a simple mathematical problem that wasn't difficult to understand. Was it near or far? The winged man sighed. Since this was a trap set by the humans, it was impossible for the other 3 planets to be unguarded. It must have something to do with the local forces of the 5th ring. If the forces of the 5th ring dared to come out, Yang Dingtian must have already worn the same pants as the 5th ring. These results were not difficult to guess, but he no longer had the energy to argue. He was mentally tired. They would break through one by one without any special judgment. Before they came into contact, they would never know how many enemies there were. Thus, he didn't say anything and just let the 2 in front of him make the decision. After all, they weren't afraid of paying interest. In the end, the foreign species didn't choose the enemies in front of them. Although they might be exhausted, they still had the numbers. As for magic power, they would still have some if they squeezed. The enemy wanted to find a soft persimmon to pinch, so the foreign species changed their direction and flew towards one of the other 3 planets. The 4-phase array was very big in terms of living creatures, but the 4-phase array was very small in terms of the universe. The humans were already waiting for them. Insect Head was very surprised. Yang Dingtian. Why are they here? I understand now. Damn it, so this is a conspiracy that the humans have already discussed. It's to make us lower our guard. It's really a place. Deliberate planning. But this time, the winged man wasn't interested in reminding him. This dog deserved to be suffocated. They still had to attack. At least in terms of numbers, Yang Dingtian was far inferior to Chang Jin's main force. The foreign species pulled themselves together and rushed towards the planet. At this time, they didn't have a deep sense of their current situation. It was one thing to be forced into a narrow space, but it was another thing to be forced into such a wide triangular cone space. For the time being, they didn't feel much pressure. Kang Yangzi saw the foreign species army swarming towards them, covering the sky and the earth. However, they weren't unprepared for this. The mission was already clear, and they had enough time to prepare. In the fake hostility with the 5 rings, they borrowed 6 treasure ships from the 5 rings. Now, they were blocking the exit of the 4-phase array. They weren't blocking the way, but for the 6 huge energy launchers at the bow of the ships. More than 30 Yang gods and 1 to 200 true lords. This was almost Yang Dingtian's most elite force. Although there weren't many of them, they were very capable. Kang Yangzi said bluntly to the cultivators, no matter what the situation is. I won't ask for help. I won't ask for help. All our forces are here. The 5 rings are guarding 2 planets, the ancient beasts are guarding 1 planet, and we are guarding the other. Don't think of retreating. We have no way out. Only by repelling them, killing them, and making them afraid are the only countermeasures. I personally think that in such a narrow exit, the density of spells can completely cover it. The Yang gods are in front, and the others are behind. The rebirth point is set outside. I'll say it again. We won't retreat a single step. If the ones in front fall, the ones behind will take over. The foreign species swarmed forward. In order to form the most effective attack, Yang Dingtian placed them very close. Then, he used all his forbidden spells. Yang Dingtian wasn't big. The most important thing was that because of their own domain, the Tao realms of the various orthodoxies were very monotonous. This might make them seem weak in the fight for the power of the universe, but in this narrow terrain, it became their advantage. Because it was easy to unify their power, the Tao realms were coordinated, and the cultivators were very familiar with each other. When all of this was added together, it formed a barrier of death in front of the array. It mercilessly harvested the lives of the foreign species. Chapter 1873. The winged men's leader couldn't bear it any longer when he saw that his attacks couldn't advance any further. Are you paying interest? I think you're losing your capital. Yang Dingren is guarding the narrowest area. The advantage is that he can concentrate his power without wasting it, but the disadvantage is that there is no space to retreat. As long as you break through a little bit, it will collapse immediately. Don't charge forward with low-level lives. Let's form an elite assault team and try to penetrate it in one go. The insect head immediately responded, that's right. Each of us will send out an elite team. Although the other party is strong, they have few people after all. I'm willing to lead the team. Horse. Horse. The winged men's anger turned into complete helplessness. Seeing that the insect head was willing to take the risk, they couldn't be too heartless. Die on the battlefield. With all due respect, you're really not suitable for studying. This strategy was indeed correct. Unlike the ordinary mutated beasts, the ones charging at the front this time were big monsters, big beasts, and big insects. They had strong vitality and great magical powers. Their ability to survive in a harsh environment was much more tenacious than ordinary mutated beasts. In the previous few attacks, the strange creatures had been wiped out completely from 10,000 feet away. However, this time, the strange creatures had charged within 10,000 feet. To them, such a distance was nothing more than a flash of light. As long as the humans' attacks were slightly delayed, they would be able to rush into the human formation immediately. Seeing that success was imminent, the mutated beasts behind also pressed forward layer by layer. They didn't care about the possibility of being trampled by the horns. Of course, they couldn't be crushed to death. At this most dangerous moment, the experienced Juyang waved his hand, and 6 huge energy pillars shot out. In an instant, 6 empty spaces were plowed in the dense group of mutated beasts. The light pillars swept across. Those who came in contact with them would die. Those who came in contact with them would die. There was no other choice but to dodge. But in such a narrow space, where could those who didn't have enough cultivation base hide? Kan Yangzi smiled coldly. Spell extension. Push forward. This was a tragic story. Wrong time, wrong place, wrong attack. The large number of casualties really hurt the mutated beasts. This time, it wasn't just interest. The winged men leader looked coldly at the receding waves of foreign species. It knew that it was impossible to achieve a breakthrough here. Everyone was traumatized. While charging, they had to constantly be on guard against the treasured ship's energy attacks. How could they continue attacking? Although Jean Xian was not around, at least there was a piece of good news. It did not have to answer for Insect Head anymore. The mutant race leaders gathered together to discuss and decided that it would be better to move to another location. At the very least, the Azura field here was too cruel for them. They gathered the remnants of the defeated army and flew towards the next planet. Here, they suddenly discovered that what awaited them was a large group of hundreds of ancient beasts. Immemorial beasts didn't know how to set up formations like humans, nor did they guard the narrowest area. They just stood at the exit, indifferent and quiet. The heavenly void beast shook its head bitterly. I'm afraid it won't work here either. We void beasts are innately suppressed by primordial beasts. In a true battle, we can't even unleash 50% of our strength. There was no way to fight. I'm afraid that a forceful order will be disobeyed. The new insect head also said, Zerg is not much better than you. Furthermore, these hundreds of ancient beasts are too powerful. Why don't we go somewhere else to take a look? The winged men were speechless. In fact, they felt that this was the best opportunity. This had nothing to do with strength or suppression. The most important thing was that the ancient beasts were not organized. This was the key to successfully escaping. But they couldn't possibly charge forward on their own, right? They would be killed by these two groups of trash. As the foreign species continued to try and dawdle, the opportunity to break through quietly disappeared. In fact, in the early stages of the four-phase formation, no matter which direction they chose to break through, there was a chance of success. As long as they hardened their hearts and endured the huge losses during the charge, they would definitely succeed. This was because the defenses of all four planets were flawed. Chang Jin's team had expended too much energy, Yang Dingtian had too few people, the ancient beasts were too casual, and the native troops from the fifth ring were too slow. Precious time slipped away amidst the hesitation of the foreign creatures. Cultivators from the fifth ring continuously rushed over, and almost all the treasured ships were pulled onto the battlefield. Under Chang Jin's command, the four directions began to become balanced, and the treasured ships were ready. They even established a tactical support force that could arrive at any planet the moment the battle broke out. While the otherworldlings were still running around in the formation, hammering here and there, the humans outside had already completed the last piece of the puzzle. Even so, the foreign species still had a chance. They only needed to stay in the formation and wait. Unless the humans entered the formation themselves, they would not be able to do anything to them. But if they entered, it would be another chaotic battle. If they forced the foreign species into a corner, it was hard to say who would be at a disadvantage. Although the core strength of a planet was endless, the humans had used it to set up the formation in a hurry. Once the time was up, the four-phase formation would naturally collapse without any need to care about it. The foreign species that had regained their freedom could scatter like birds and beasts. There would definitely be losses, and failure was inevitable. However, half of the remaining fellows would have no problem escaping. But they would not have guessed it. Under Chang Jin's insidious calculations, he had figured out the psychology of the demonic beasts and patched up his own loopholes. Now, it was time to fix the biggest loophole of the four-phase formation's limited duration. Looking at a primordial soul cultivator beside him, he chuckled and said, "You said you had a good chat with the leader of the winged men during the battle?" The primordial soul cultivator smiled cunningly. "Yes. And he was the one who took the initiative. I can also guess his thoughts. This is for the sake of the winged men race. Instead of learning the true abilities of the humans, they chose to learn these crooked methods." Chang Jin nodded. "It's a good thing that they are willing to learn from the humans. I think they are learning in a good direction. What are true abilities? What are crooked methods? If we let them learn true abilities, we will be the unlucky ones. How about this? We humans are all about the unity and equality of all the races in the universe, the acceptance of all the rivers into the sea, the magnanimous. We can talk about it. We can talk about the future of the universe and the harmony of the cultivation world. We can tell them that we humans have never treated the winged men as outsiders. Isn't it just an extra pair of wings? We humans. Well, let's talk about you. Aren't you six-fingered? It's the same thing. But Zerg is different. We have to let them understand that everything has a price. If there is no Zerg in the formation, it's not like we can't consider giving them a way out." The primordial soul was somewhat dissatisfied. "Senior brother, you are bringing this up again. So what if I have 6 fingers? I didn't grow them on purpose. What's the same thing as growing an extra pair of wings? You can't say this. These things are very superstitious. They don't believe in 6-fingered people and firmly believe that 6-fingered people are the symbol of treachery." Chang Jin waved his hand. Isn't that good? You can sacrifice yourself for the fifth ring, right? What reputation is there to eat or use? So be it if they go back on their word. You go and talk to them. After they have destroyed the insects, we will destroy them. Chapter 1874. Amir Khan also knew that his performance in this defensive battle was very clumsy. Because the goal was not the same, because the orders changed day and night, because the positioning of himself was not accurate, and so on. But he still firmly believed that going out was the right thing to do, even if he had to pay a huge price. Delaying for such a long time, it was all for the sake of notifying every single Hung River cultivator. This was his responsibility, it was his personality that decided he would do it and not leave anyone behind. Otherwise, in the chaos of war, without a clear goal, it would be easy for accidents to happen on the battlefield. This may be a good character, but it was definitely not what a commander should do. A commander should be cold-blooded and heartless, abandoning a part to save another part. Where was the fairness? Now is not the time to talk about fairness. Notifying everyone might make him feel better, but for everyone, they had lost precious time. Perhaps, the quality of a saint was not suitable for the job of commander. When everyone was ready, Amir Khan's spirit rose. As the person in charge of the Scroll of Eternal River, he had the right to control this sacred river. Flipping the Scroll of Eternal River outside the world's great membrane meant moving tens of thousands of cultivators outside at the same time, and then removing the Scroll of Eternal River, allowing the souls of the ordinary people to return to the real Eternal River to rest in peace. Tens of thousands of people appeared outside the membrane at the same time, each in a different direction. How could you stop them? It was a very decisive plan, but it was a little wishful thinking. The old foxes of the Alliance had not been chatting idly for the past few months. They had already thought through the entire process of destroying the world. Not to mention escaping, even the next series of measures to remove the Hung River Foundation after occupying it had already been written down in words. Amir Khan did not know any of this, but he knew that he could not change back and forth anymore. At first, he wanted to die, but now he wanted to break through the barriers of the universe. What else could he change into? Once he entered the void universe, the space was infinite, those Yuaniing were almost no threat to the Yang God, there was no point in fighting. He did not plan to change anymore, like the other Hung River Yang gods, they were all sinners of Hung River. Even someone as wise as him understood that the best strategy was, from 100 years ago, when they knew that the main forces of the main world were going to act against them, they should have immediately started the seed plan. At that time, there would be a lot of time for them to calmly send the middle and low-level disciples to countless domains. They would not be able to find them. On the other hand, they were wasting their time, racking their brains to come up with a way to fight against the mainstream world and ultimately win. This was simply impossible. It was a strategic mistake, not a tactical one. Since the strategy was wrong, there was no way to reverse the situation tactically. It was a cognitive error, a miscalculation of his position in the universe. They were indeed great worlds, but the premise was that they stood together with everyone else. Want to establish an independent mountain? They were little realms. The Eternal River rolled and formed a mysterious crosslink with the grand membrane of heaven and earth. Then, like the lazy Lu Xiaoyi changing his socks, he didn't use a new one, but wore it inside out. The heaven and earth macro membrane remained the same, but the Eternal River scroll had been flipped to the outside of the membrane. Its purpose was to expel all the cultivators out of the membrane. Soon after, he murmured to himself and waved his sleeves. The countless souls in the Eternal River let out a soundless cry of joy. Through the macro membrane, they were thrown into the real Eternal River. Outside the membrane, tens of thousands of Hung River cultivators still stood in the shape of a great river, but the Eternal River scroll that they once relied heavily on was no longer there. Just as the Hung River's grand membrane of heaven and earth was changing, the 7 Taoists who had been guarding outside the membrane, one each from 5 rings, Buddhism, Heaven's Choice, Zhou Xian, Anchor Chain, Fu Chen, and Guang Ming nodded to each other. Taoist Five Rings took a step forward, and the scroll on his sleeve unfolded. He silently circulated his thoughts, and the heavenly secrets changed. This was the Three Pure Ones' top-notch Tao decree, with layers upon layers. It didn't favor any side, but the power of this Tao decree was often exceptionally strong. It was created by a half-step immortal who had stepped into the immortal realm. It had only one use, and that was to divide the cultivators who came out of the grand membrane of heaven and earth according to their realms. Yuanying, Yin spirit, primordial spirit, and Yang spirit were all at their own level, and couldn't be linked together. It would last for 2 hours. 2 hours was only in theory. Considering that the number of cultivators being divided was too large, with more than 10,000 Yuanying and more than 400 Yang spirits, the time they could last would be greatly reduced. But it didn't matter, 3 Yang spirits against 1 wouldn't take up much time. The interior young evildoers were recognized by the Tao decree as being in the primordial spirit realm, including Lu Xiaoyi. Actually, there wasn't much time for them to consider. Hundreds of Hung River primordial spirit cultivators had decisively launched an attack on them. At this point, the Alliance had revealed their true intentions, and their only goal was to destroy Hung River orthodoxy. The restriction of the Tao decree was to peel them apart layer by layer, and attack them separately. There were no enemies at the level of Yuanying and Yin spirit, and their own Yang spirit would face 3 times the number of the Alliance's attacks. Only at the level of primordial spirit perfected lords, there were less than 500 Hung River primordial spirit cultivators left after the previous battle. Now that they encountered less than 40 interior evildoers, they were exceptionally jealous. They couldn't wait to divide and devour them. It was conceivable that the people of Hung River orthodoxy wouldn't have such a good opportunity to take revenge in the future. Therefore, even if they knew that these people were evildoers of the interior and the future of the universe, since Hung River orthodoxy had no future, what was there to worry about? This was a more cruel battle than the one in the Scroll of Eternal River. Neither side had the advantage of the environment. Even in the normal void of the universe, the interior evildoers were strong because they had taken a step forward, and their individual strength was more tyrannical. The Hung River primordial spirit cultivators had the advantage of numbers, and their will was like a fortress. They didn't lack death warriors who would rather die together with them to take these people away. If they didn't fight with all their might now, would they wait until the 300 Alliance Yang spirits turned back to fight? The young evildoers of the interior didn't fight in a group battle when the inner and outer realm fought. Instead, they encountered the most chaotic and cruel battle since they came to the lower realm outside Hung River orthodoxy. But no one retreated, because they were proud in their hearts. It was just a group of losers who were struggling at death's door. 2 battlefields. They were both cruel, but the trend in the Yang spirit battlefield was obvious. 300 against 100, and the side with 300 was above the side with 100. How could they fight? They could only rely on their rebirth to show their unyieldingness. But this kind of stubbornness was pale. It was also useless. In the dictionary of these old Yang spirits who had lived for at least thousands of years, the word forgiveness had long since disappeared. There was no mercy, no mercy. If you let him go today, perhaps in the future, such a cruel avenger would appear outside your home planet. That would be the real trouble. This was a large-scale occasion where they collectively watched a short movie of the past and the future. With so many pairs of eyes watching, there was no secret to speak of. Once the Tao-dispelling celestial phenomenon began, it never stopped. Chapter 1875. The primordial spirit battlefield was even more intense. The evildoers were indeed evildoers, but the people of Hengi were also fighting with their lives on the line. They knew that this was the last moment of their lives, and there were not many chances for them to fight with their lives on the line. Mortals were afraid of desperados, But in a sense, cultivators were also afraid of desperados whose cultivation levels were not too far apart from those who were in the same realm. Because their actions could no longer be judged by common sense. There were especially many who surrounded Lu Xiaoyi. It was because of his consistent ability to attract hatred, and also because he was a genuine fifth ring person. Swordsman, other than the fifth ring Shan Yuan, was there anyone else who was so arrogant? Lu Xiaoyi was so angry that he pointed at another evildoer not far from him as he fled for his life. Hey! Are you stupid? I'm not the only one with fifth ring. That person is called Qing Xin, and he's also a fifth ring. How can you favor one over the other? No one paid attention to him, and the people of Hengyi continued to surround and kill, disregarding their lives every time they attacked. At this time, every evildoer of the inner realm had to run, whether they were willing or not, whether they were good at it or not. Standing still was courting death. Qing Xin passed by him, and even greeted him. Wow! Lu Yingxiong. I've known you for a long time, and your name is like thunder in my ears. You killed Maradi, the evildoer of the exterior of Hengyi, right? You're really bold, and have good means. I admire you. I admire you. In this battle of words, Qing Xian won completely, and Lu Xiaoyi lost completely. There were more people following behind the sword Qilong River. Lu Xiaoyi cursed endlessly, so angry that even his body was stuttering. As the saying goes, every step he took, he would stop and strike a pose every 3 steps. But the strange thing was that although there were more than 30 Hengyi primordial spirits chasing after him, no one could get close to him within the danger zone. Instead, there were people who were constantly being killed, and they died as they chased after him. It was as if fireworks were set off behind them, fireworks of death. They charged too fiercely, and did not care about themselves. For a monster with insufficient temperament and experience, this kind of determination to die might be a little frightening, but for a murderer like Lu Xiaoyi, they were the best targets. With the help of Hengyi's primordial spirit, he understood that this kind of suicidal assault was the favorite method of the swordsman who lived on the front lines. But what was the use of understanding this? Would he stop chasing after her? Are we just going to let him run wild? Is that why you're so timid? A war between cultivators must be fought in accordance with the situation. The major areas were not harmonious, while the minor areas were wrinkled. The Hengyi realm was like this. If the grand strategy was wrong and the positioning was wrong, then everything that happened next would be logical. Even in a battle between individuals, they didn't have the right to decide their own fate. How sad. Fighting in sorrow, dying in sorrow. Lu Xiaoyi's sword was ruthless. He would not become weak just because his opponent was exhausted. He was the most crucial initiator of this world-ending war, as well as the person most implicated in the path of karma. To solve this kind of karma, the best way was to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Let the Hengyi realm and the Hengyi orthodoxy never rise again. In the history of cultivators, there were countless examples like this, so it was nothing. He was willing to continue killing until there was no opponent in the primordial spirit level. Among all the interior geniuses, there was another person who was hated as much as him. Those who were chasing him from behind were no less than him. This person was the marching monk. This was the human's attitude towards betrayers. The monk clenched his teeth and held on, not saying a word. His desire to kill the people of Hengyi was above Lu Xiaoyi. This was also the attitude of a betrayer towards a former ally. When they completely shed all pretense of cordiality, their hatred was even greater than that of a fifth ring. Lu Xiaoyi was a kind-hearted person. How could he leave his comrade in a difficult situation? So when he passed by, he helped the monk cut off his primordial spirit, and before he left, he was still full of righteousness. For friendship. In the end, the Hengyi primordial spirits that followed him left and turned to attack the marching monk's team. The people of Hengyi had a simple idea. Since they couldn't kill the swordsman, they would kill the monk. If they couldn't kill the enemy, they would kill the traitor. This whole thing, Lu Xiaoyi's record of killing people went from an odd number to an even number, and from 2 hands to 2 hands and 2 legs. Later on, the number of body parts added up was almost uncountable, and he started to count the hairs, but his happiness didn't last long. Even the Master's Dao token couldn't withstand such a large scale, large number, and powerful battlefield. After half an hour, it disappeared, and the restriction disappeared. Then, among the 6 Taoists outside, the Heaven's Volition Taoist stood out again. He picked out the most suitable item from the pile of items and waved it in the air. Amir Khan was fighting alone. There were very few people around, and even Salman Khan's soul had returned to the Eternal River. He didn't have the courage to judge how many of his comrades were left. As long as he counted, his heart would be in pain. He had another realization. Actually, in this case, where was the right strategy? Everything was wrong. Because the change of era was the survival of the fittest, the elimination of dissidents, the unscrupulous, the winner was the king, and the loser was the bandit. Those who followed me would prosper, and those who opposed me would perish. The outcome of the Hengi River system was already decided when it was first established. How could any one person, or any group, change it? Even he couldn't. The Taoists and Buddhists, as well as the minions behind the 2 sects, had been fighting and killing each other for millions of years. But in history, there was new life in destruction, and cooperation in quarrels. This was the rhythm of a big family living together. The Taoists were the father, the Buddhists were the mother. There were countless children, and children's children. Although it was overflowing, they could always fall together. This was the essence. And the Hengi River system was an outsider. It was that simple. So, they were usually smiling, but when they got the chance, they would bite down on their throats and wouldn't rest until they were dead. Success was because of the Eternal River, failure was because of the Eternal River. If he had the chance to go back to ancient times, would he be able to change it? Amir Khan was thinking in melancholy. He was killed while he was thinking. He was reborn after death, and he was thinking again while he was fighting. At this moment, his mind was clearer than it had ever been in his thousands of years of cultivation. He thought more, thought deeper, and thought further. But it was impossible. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. It grew stronger and stronger. Actually, the change that the Hengi River system hoped for the most came from that fierce sword vein, that godlike figure. That person broke the heavens and gave the universe a chance to restart. This was not only an opportunity for the sword vein, but also for every orthodoxy that desired change. They were really blinded by butter. Why did they have to go against the sword vein, against the 5th ring? They were originally people on the same battlefront, grasshoppers on the same rope. They were all the cultivation forces of the 3rd universe. They all hoped for change, desired to become stronger, and change the existing order. Those high and mighty traditional powers. Yes. They should be standing together with the 5th ring, standing firmly together. That was the only way to change the future. Wrong, 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 wrong. We should be the same kind of people. Amir Khan, who was cut down again, drew a line in the sky with his blood. This was his final song. At this point, the young gods of the Hengi River system were all destroyed. At least, they proved their courage. None of them tried to escape. Chapter 1876. North Wind looked at the solemn scene and smacked his lips. What does he mean? What does he understand? Lu Xiaoyi shrugged. Heng River and the 5 rings both desire change. That's why we shouldn't be enemies, but friends. At least before the end of the era. He's a different person from the rest of Heng River, but he understood it too late. What's the use of understanding it too early? What can it change? Qing Xian pursed his lips. Luckily he understood it too late. If Heng River had really turned around, the 5 rings would have been dragged down by him sooner or later. You guys have to understand that even 3 good opponents are no match for a single pig teammate. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Ma Lu, I realize that you have no sympathy at all. When people are about to die, their words are sad. Can't you mourn for them a little and say something nice that will warm their hearts? Qing Xian also sighed. I realize that I'm becoming more and more like a swordsman, but you're becoming more and more like a Dharma cultivator. Weren't you the one who started it? Weren't you the one who spread the word? Weren't you the one who came up with the plan to break the membrane? Weren't you the one who killed the most? Your hands are stained with blood, but you're pretending to be compassionate. North Wind, stay away from this person. He eats people without spitting out their bones. He even wrapped a towel around his head and pretended to be a sheep. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Are you praising your Dharma lineage? The entire upper echelon of Hung River suffered a devastating blow. The Yang spirits were all destroyed, and the primordial spirits were all dead. But did Hung River make any arrangements outside? Were there any fish that escaped the net? It was hard to say for sure if those who had traveled far or were unable to return because of some matter. But based on his understanding of Hung River, even if there were only a few who were not worth worrying about. The more troublesome ones were the Yin spirits and Yuanying. When the war first started, there were 3,000 Yin spirits and 20,000 Yuanying in the Hung River realm. Now they were all trapped in the Dao Zhao. After several battles, there were only a few hundred Yin spirits and a few thousand Yuanying left. What should these people do? In theory, those who had guts should have died in battle, and those who were left were those who were afraid of death. However, in the history of mankind, there had never been a lack of those who endured humiliation. They were more resilient. If they were raised, when the Yuanying became a supreme, the Yin spirit became a primordial spirit, and the Yang spirit even took a step forward, who would come all the way here to wipe their asses? After all, they had already surrendered. Killing captives was inauspicious. On this point, cultivators were no different from mortals. In fact, cultivators valued it more because they knew that karma was real. He couldn't always use the Tao decree to bind them, there had to be a rule. Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian were too lazy to participate in these matters. These interior geniuses had already broken through the Hung River boundary and gone to the Hung River boundary to enjoy themselves. This was what they deserved. In the collision between the inner and outer scenic skies, they lost 6 people, but under the desperate counterattack of hundreds of primordial spirits from the Hung River realm, 7 of them died. Including Lu Xiaoyi, there were 43 interior geniuses, but only 30 of them could enjoy the fruits of victory. This showed how tragic the counterattack was before they died. Of course, it also showed that their strength was still limited after they took a step forward. They still needed time to polish. The weak had been eliminated, and the rest were the true elites. In the Hung River boundary, there were very few great cultivators who could enter and leave the green darkness. Basically, they were all small cultivators at the level of Foundation Establishment Jin Dan. After the patriarchs of the orthodoxy were wiped out, they fell into a state of extreme chaos. Once the suppression was lost, chaos would come. It was conceivable that in time, the chaos in the cultivation world would spread to the moral world. That would be the real tragedy of the human world. The geniuses were not as cunning as the old foxes. They thought that they could come in and have fun, and comfort the empty hearts of the people of Hung River, especially the servants who serve the gods. However, in this chaos, they had to abide by their duties as cultivators and calm down the uneasy atmosphere in the cultivation world of Hung River. There were many ways to deal with the aftermath. In fact, letting the Hung River boundary fall into chaos, overthrowing the caste system, re-establishing order, and so on seemed to be a way. It all depended on how the Alliance thought about it. In short, it was a big problem. Too many people meant that the problem could not be solved through migration, and the unique culture of Hung River had to be destroyed. There must be cultivators from mainstream orthodoxy to guard it. Who would do it? What was the ratio? Would it become another 5 rings? Lu Xiaoyi did not consider this. There were so many old foxes, and it was not his turn to speak. When it came to killing people's hearts, these old foxes were more thoughtful than anyone else. He just flew slowly along the Hang River. Along the way, the cultivators of Hang River saw him and avoided him from afar. They knew that he was an invader from another world. At this time, they would be courting death if they acted rashly or showed their integrity. That was exactly what they wanted. In fact, the Hang River was not that bad from a closer look. There were few places that were bad, and most of the river was still beautiful. As for what they saw in the past, it was just propaganda that someone wanted to do. But all of this was not important anymore. If this beautiful river became ordinary, it would be like the rivers in every boundary. That would be the real end. On this point, it was especially difficult because it might involve the immortal world, the mystery of reincarnation in the Hang River, and so on. Now it seemed that his initial idea of throwing in a few black dragons to solve the problem was too naive. This river was the key to solving the problem of Hang River boundary. He came to the source of the Hang River, the southern foot of the Genge Snow Mountain. After looking around for a long time, his divine sense swept across the sky, the ground, and the mountains, but he did not find anything. It was impossible to find anything. It was just a thought in his mind. Would cutting off the source mean cutting off the secret of the Hang River? It was not that simple. Moreover, hundreds of millions of ordinary people on both sides of the Hang River would be displaced. This was not the way cultivators solved problems. The formation of the Hang River system was not formed in a day. Similarly, erasing it would not be done in a day. It was better to leave it to the old foxes to worry about. After going around in circles, he left the Hang River. He did not know where he wanted to go. He just followed his heart and felt carefree. This day, he came to the sky above a temple outside a big city. The bustling crowd was even more crowded than usual. They probably thought that their God had abandoned them, so they were especially pious, hoping that their meager power of faith could help their God. This was the temple, right? This was the place where Bai Yang had stayed for 100 years. Here, she started to hate this world of cultivation. "I have done what I promised you," Lu Xiaoyi said softly. He pressed his hand down and then left. There were no more major repairs here. A few days later, the beams would bend, and cracks would appear on the walls. A few days later, there would be a small-scale collapse. A month later, this place would be razed to the ground. As for what impact it would have, what kind of God would it offend? What kind of burden would it add to the ordinary people here? He was too lazy to think about it. This was the right of the victor. He also mourned for Bai Yang. Chapter 1877. Lu Xiaoyi had an irresponsible attitude towards Henghe, but some people were born to work hard. Their obsessive-compulsive sense of responsibility made them unwilling to let themselves relax. For such a person, relaxation was poison. Some people swam in Hang River, sometimes breaking the waves, sometimes diving. Their speed was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. When they were fast, they were like the tide, and when they were slow, they were like tortoises. Lu Xiaoyi passed by in the air and laughed loudly. "Have a drink. You'll be a citizen of Hang River in your next life." A water arrow shot out as fast as lightning, but it was easily dodged by the person in the air. Qing Xian scolded, "I'm here doing field research, but you're leisurely over there. God must be blind to let a scourge like you run rampant." Lu Xiaoyi laughed, "I don't know if God is blind or not, but you might really be blind. Hey, how's the discussion with those old foxes? If there's still room for discussion, I'll find a temple for a big sacrifice. The belly dance here is very good, and it's authentic. I'll take you to see it. Good enough, right?" While chatting, Qing Xian told him about the Alliance's old foxes' arrangements for Hang River. To solve the problem of Hang River, there were two aspects involved. One was the realm, and the other was the surrendered cultivators. solving one of them alone was meaningless. Everyone rejected the idea of the fifth ring. This was because the expeditionary army at that time was different from the current alliance. There were many realms in the expeditionary army, especially the left side. Due to the mother planet's Spiritium situation, they had strong territorial demands. Although Tianlang at that time was a plundered planet, the people were simple, and their culture was not rejected by the mainstream world. There was abundant Spiritium, so it was a good place to stay. The situation now was not the same. In terms of Spiritium, Hung River was not stronger than the mother planet of the Alliance. It was even weaker than the fifth ring, Zhou Xian, Heaven's Choice. There was no sense of urgency to change homes. The most important thing was that Hung River's culture and traditions were a headache for every power in the Alliance. This was not something that could be solved in 1 or 2 years. It would take 1,000 years or even longer to completely eliminate it. Territory, the most important thing was that it could provide an endless supply of new cultivators. If this could not be done, what was the point of having more Spiritium and more mortals? Seeing that the era was about to change, there was chaos everywhere, and wars were frequent. There was not much time left for everyone to build, and they might not have the mood to build a new star. Therefore, in the normal order of the universe, a top-level domain that would not be abandoned no matter what, had become a piece of chicken rib. It was tasteless to eat, but a pity to abandon. If you build it, invest it, and spend a lot of effort, but you don't know what would happen after the era. If you had the energy, you might as well make your mother planet to welcome a more severe challenge. This was the general's mentality. The reason why they rejected the idea of the 5 rings being divided into territories by the occupiers was because they knew that there was an unresolvable conflict between the 5 rings and Buddhism. Therefore, each of them had a group of underlings behind them. Occupying other people's territory and starting a civil war in other people's territory was very stupid. It was like the Alliance had created a barrel of gunpowder for themselves, which could explode at any time because of some trivial matter. For example, Hung River City. Of course, they could not give up on Hung River City. Then, with such a long distance, they would not need to do anything else in the future. They could just travel through the universe all day long. They did not want to divide and conquer Hung River City, but they also did not want to give such a big piece of meat to Hung River City. If they gave Hung River City to Hung River City would not agree. If they gave Hung River City to Hung River City, Zhou Xian would not be happy. Things like the floating anchor chain were really difficult to pick up. The final decision was to give Hung River City to Hung River City. Hung River City and Hung River City had some friendship, and Hung River City and Hung River City also had some old friendship. This made it possible for everyone to not be averse to Hung River City. The most important thing was that Hung River City was the only power that could perfectly settle the issue of Hung River City and deal with the surrendered cultivators. Because Hung River City was incomparably huge, they had the ability to move cultivators here. Hung River City also had the desire to develop in the origin world. They could easily get tens of thousands of cultivators here. This was something that the top realms in the origin world could not do. Only Hung River City dared to accept these surrendered cultivators. They were not afraid of them causing trouble. It was also because of their huge size. If they gave one to each country, would they still dare to cause trouble? After a long time, all kinds of accidents would disappear. This matter is basically settled like this. Qing Xian smacked her lips. Hung River City is so lucky. He did not put in much effort, but picked up the biggest peach. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. There is no such thing as a free lunch in the cultivation world. It is a blessing now, but the future is hard to say. If Hung River City's power comes down for revenge, Hung River City will be at the front. Well, now Hung River City will have to take the blame for them. This is the price. Since they ate the fat, they have to shoulder the burden. Hopefully, their size can help them solve the following problems. Qing Xian sneered. Hung River City is also gambling. They need a foothold in the origin world, a place that is big enough and full of spiritual opportunity to settle a large number of cultivators. Where can they find such a place? And why should they give it to them? Unless Hung River City is willing to bear the main karma. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. I originally thought that Zhou Xian would be willing to come over. Or Zhou Xian and Hung River City will be divided up by Hung River City. In any case, their two families are getting along well. They turned enemies into friends in a game of heaven and earth. The two of us can be considered important participants. Until now, I still don't understand how they fought this battle. At first, they were hugging and biting, but then they hugged and kissed. Qing Xian smiled bitterly. This is temperament. These two powers are not the kind to go to extremes. They prefer to find common points in differences. It is not very likely that Zhou Xian will come to Hung River City because they are too close to our fifth ring. The Buddhist light will not agree. Also, Zhou Xian has no desire to expand their territory in this area. They are too Buddhist and are too busy with their own places. Handing Hung River City to Hung River City was indeed a good idea. These old foxes were very thorough in their considerations. Actually, their more profound goal was to pull the Heaven's Choice continent firmly into the Alliance's war chariot. In the future, if the origin world's cultivation world had any problems, would Hung River City be able to escape from them? In the future, there might be internal conflicts within the Alliance, such as the Fifth Ring and the Buddhist Light. But if other powers were involved, the Alliance's power would be very terrifying. Although the expedition to Hung River City had ended, the Alliance did not disband. They relied on Hung River City and Heaven's Choice continent to enter the origin world to unite everyone. The essence of war was to unite and share warmth. At least, this would prevent any major changes in Eastern Elephant City for thousands of years. This was what the old foxes valued the most. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.